Good afternoon, Madam Mayor. It is 5:03 and we are live.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the City of Lake Worth Beach. It's a City Commission workshop regarding LDRS, affordable housing, economic development. It's Monday, April 11th, and it's about 5:04. Can I have the roll, please?
Mayor Betty Rush,
Here.
Vice Mayor Christopher McVoy,
Here.
Commissioner Sarah Maliga,
Present.
Commissioner Kimberly Stokes,
Here.
Commissioner Ronaldo Diaz.
Here.
Okay, and the Pledge of Allegiance will be led by Commissioner Maliga.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag
of
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen and fellow commissioners. Tonight we have quite a loaded little agenda. And it starts with the discussion of land development regulations, sustainable bonus incentive program, and economic development. And I believe I'm going to turn this over to William Waters because he's waiting for me to do that. What?
A little brief one. Could we at some point maybe establish sort of a policy that when we put out the agendas of work sessions or workshops, that we clarify on the page whether there will or won't be?
Well, actually, we certainly could do that. We certainly could, because we did vote that there would not be public comment at workshops. We've waived that once or twice, but I think that's a good idea. Madam Clerk, could you make a note of that?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. Okay. The commission has asked staff to look at the land development regulations, the sustainable bonus incentive program, and the economic development policy. We're going to be talking about those things tonight. All, they've not been reviewed in quite some time. This commission has been pretty active with commenting on the sustainable bonus program and questioning it. So I'm going to now turn it over to William Waters.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. I know it's a very heavy agenda, and I'm going to try to give you a little bit of background because not all of you have been either participating in public politics or in some of the meetings that we had beginning as far back as 2010 to get where we are with our sustainable bonus program and the land development regulations. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a brief history. This wrong one?
No, we're just gonna share it now since you're getting to the presentation.
Share.
Okay. Let me show you that one.
So, I wanted to go over a little bit about how we got where we are because there seems to be some consternation and confusion over what sustainability means in the context of economic development and investment in the city. So I pulled some of the information that was gathered in 2011 when I first got to the city. At that time, city manager Susan Stanton charged me with getting a comp plan squared away and getting land development regulations rewritten because they'd begun that work in 2007 and we're struggling to get it to a point where it could be adopted. So the work began in earnest in the spring of 2011. And so from a community standpoint, sustainability involves all that it takes into account to run the city that meets both the human and social needs, financial needs, environmental needs, cultural needs, and fiscal needs. I'm going to give you some background here on what is sustainable, the various terms. What I think is most important from a sustainability standpoint, and that's one reason why the department that I oversee was reorganized as part of fiscal year 2012, was that the principles of our sustainability program were to look at the economy, society, both social and human, and the environment. So the changes that were made to the land development regulations and comp plan, we're trying to take those three aspects into account. Part of the evolution of it also came from a program called SEED, and I went to a class at the Graduate School of Design in Harvard. I learned about this program probably 8 summers ago. It's called Social, Economic, Environmental Design, and it brings the issues of social justice and racial equity into the forefront of economic development. And that was incorporated in some respects in how we go about doing public policy in terms of economic development and private investment. So the seed policies or principles are there advocating for public choice for all, building structures that include and engage stakeholders to make for future a very good job of promoting social equity, the range of values and social identities, speaking about our diversity and inclusion, growing a place and building its capacity to survive in the long term, and then also to design to help conserve resources and minimize waste. And that program was started by some gentlemen from North Carolina, and it has proliferated since then. Our Sustainable Finance Program also incorporates various international and national certification programs in order to meet the requirements. The most well-known is the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. And I won't go into all the details, but basically it's a checklist that you're doing a project that's better than what the code requires by certain percentages and at various points. The first anticipated LEED certified project here was the Echo Green building across the street, but it did not receive its LEED certification. The second one was the beach complex and the rebuilding of the casino. That also did not receive its certification. The only certification I'm aware of is a private home up in College Park. So we're still hoping to get one of those 2020. With the evolution of LEED, other ones came out of that look more at a cradle to cradle, which means the beginning of resources to the end of resources being used. And the most easy one is green globes, which is a more practical approach to green building. The well-certified building standard takes into account a great deal of information when it comes to public and user health and well-being, not only just sites and architecture. And then the site rating system is another one that came out recently in the past few years that looks at the site itself and it being sustainable over the long term. So in our land development regulations, which are supported by the comprehensive plan, which was adopted in 2011, 12, and then the LDRs were in 2013, we have 2 tiers of sustainable bonus. In writing the land development regulations, any building over 2 stories must participate in the program. There was a direction given by the Joint Planning and Preservation Board at the time and the City Commission that we sort of have an historic city that generally is 2 stories high. So any buildings bigger than that should be giving something else back or do a little bit more than a standard by right project. So in our code right now, the base height is 2 stories and 30 feet. The Sustainable Bonus Program in its tier 1 level allows up to an additional story from 1 to 4 stories, depending on which district. The 4 stories is added in the hotel district, which came sort of rather late in the land development regulation evolution. It allows the height to be increased from 30 feet to 35 and as much as to 65 feet. It allows intensity increases on 4 area ratios. And also the current value under our schedule of fees and charges is $750. And what that means is that a developer or somebody moving forward with the project at the time could invest $7.50 for each square foot above that 3rd floor in improvements or enhancements or amenities on their project. They can meet the program. You can also meet the program by incorporating historic preservation or the LEED certifications that I mentioned, or other Florida Green Building is another one. The second tier came into being in 2017 with changes to the comp plan, which allowed another tier of density, intensity type bonuses, but they can only be done through a plan development. And we have a variety of plan developments. One is an urban plan development, which requires a ½ an acre. We have traditional plan development, which includes mixed-use plan development as well as residential plan development. And west of Dixie Highway, those are normally 2 acres or more. And then we also have a 5-acre plan development process west of 95. If you go through a plan development process at its base level, you can increase your density and height to the maximums that are in the height and density table in the comp plan, which for the most part is about the same thing as what is in the land development code right now. If you go for an urban plan development of ½ an acre or more, you can increase your density, intensity, and height by 25%. For plan developments that are west of Dixie and are 2 acres or more, you can increase your density, intensity, and height by 50%. And then in one singular area, which is the Transporting Development West District around Tyrell Station, there's a possibility of a 5-acre project or more increasing the density by 100%, while at the same time increasing just the height and intensity by 50%. And on the current fees and charges schedule, those square feet are worth $15 a square foot.
Okay, I'm going to stop you for a second because there's what I'd like to do if I have consensus to do this is just not to get in a dialogue, but I have a couple just basic questions. How did this go? So do we don't want to bog them down, but do we want to wait to the end for questions or come as they come?
I always prefer questions along the way because this is a lot.
It's a lot going to be.
Right, I was also wondering, because I know staff wants to hear from us, so I was wondering were you planning on breaking at some point to get, okay, but I do think smaller, more digestible chunks
Yeah,
to stop
there's a lot.
and check in.
And just the whole, so I'll go first with a couple of questions. You suggest is the suggestion that a builder could come in and decide what they would determine whether it's lead, green, gable, globes, well, or the other. Okay, so I'm gonna have a second question when we discuss things for my colleagues here is that, why not make them pick one? That's why I think the LED is the standard. That's one question.
I was curious about why we had two projects that were going for the LED and didn't get it. So I just hearing that we have projects say they're gonna do it and they can't. Can you elaborate? What, I don't want to interrupt you, but you're talking about.
I had a couple more questions.
So yeah, when we get to that, that was my question, is why aren't we able to do this?
Okay, and how do we come to the video, 750 square foot, what does that mean in real life?
Well, it means that we looked at a evaluation that if somebody or developer or investor were going to be trying to get additional square feet, what was in a reasonable amount of an investment per square foot that would not jeopardize the project, but could be run into a pro forma. And at the time, it was $5 a square foot at the base level. This is back in 2012. And it was increased to $750, I think, 2 years ago as values of buildings became more expensive or more, and it should stay within no more than 5% of what the projected construction cost value would be in order for it to be an inducement to do additional development without making cost prohibitive. That's where the 750 came from.
Okay, and I appreciate that. I'm having a little trouble understanding it.
Okay.
Does it mean, because I really may just be completely misunderstanding this. It seems like it costs more than $750 a square foot to build a building.
It does.
Okay, so what is, I'm having trouble connecting that number with what they get for it, or how, I'm having trouble with those.
So let's just, for the assumption purposes, to say it costs $200 a square foot to build a square foot of living space.
Okay,
The developer's only going to invest a certain percentage of that on top of it in order to meet the sustainable bonus. At some point, that value becomes too great and it makes it cost prohibitive to build additional square feet because that 200 will go beyond what the market can handle. So we've tried to keep the sustainable bonus value. This is incorporating at the time. You had to incorporate that value in your project. So if you had 100,000 square feet of additional square footage, you had to put in $750,000 worth of extras in your project beyond what you were building, either it was office, residential, commercial. And so you could meet that a variety of ways. If you did a LEED certified project, at least certified, you met the whole thing right off the bat, because there are so many items that are incorporated as those requirements that would drive up the cost of a square foot anyway. We did not feel at the time that it was beneficial to ask them to do that plus something else. Historic preservation was important. So if you incorporate a historic preservation building in the project, that would meet half of the requirement. Florida Green Building is a much easier certification to get. It's statewide recognized. That counts as half. The other half would have to be in the form of other amenities on the site. Well, building and green globes are fairly synonymous with the LEED process. They have a lot of the equal types of requirements in a project: indoor air quality, recycled materials, water reduction, energy reductions. And so we expanded the international and national certifications that a developer could choose to utilize to meet the program to include not only LEED, but also WELL and Green Globes. And Green Globes is a much more broad-based and simple to understand certification versus LEED.
But does it have the same level of excellence or?
Yes. And then WELL takes it a little step farther, is that it really gets into indoor air quality and the way a user or resident benefits from living in a WELL building. WELL buildings are fairly expensive. They're not as prolific and popular as some of the other ones, but they cover the whole thing from cradle to cradle when it comes to generation of natural resources to their recycling or when they come to a life end. And so we wanted to recognize that one as well. I don't know of any WELL certified buildings in Florida. They're more prevalent in the Northeast and the Northwest and in Europe. Part of that is due to the fact that our building code is already so stringent, as well as our energy code. It's very difficult to get the improvements that are required to meet the minimum standard to even participate in the program, let alone get the additional points to actually get certified. So LEED has made some modifications over the years to accommodate some of this stringent requirements of Florida, and Green Globes also takes those into account. If I find one in Florida, a WELL building, I'll let you know.
Can you give us an example of one of those stringent requirements that is preventing people from going after the WELL certification? Like, where's the conflict?
Well, the documentation is pretty demanding. The commissioning of the project, once it's open, you have to manage the building over its life expectancy a certain way so that you maintain the indoor air quality elements and the maintenance requirements that are for efficiencies that are established at its opening when it gets a certificate of appropriateness. Some of the other items are the materials can be difficult since Florida is long and skinny and kind of far away from where a lot of natural materials come from. Meeting the transportation and carbon reduction requirements of the building can be hard to document. The cost of having it commissioned and the professionals that are involved, since WELL is newer, but it's more comprehensive, there aren't that many people available that can actually implement and work with a contractor or a design team to bring that about. And so I think it will become more popular as people become more demanding of more carbon friendly and greenhouse gas reductions, because especially millennials and newer people want that as part of the sales or marketing piece. So it will grow in popularity as people find out about it.
And then a follow-up to Commissioner Stokes' comment about, you cited 2 buildings in the city that were scheduled to be LEED, but they weren't. So my one question is, why not? How did that happen? My another question is, if we were to give some sustainability bonus to somebody, then they couldn't pull it off. Que pasa?
Okay. Well, the 2 that I mentioned, the green building across the street's never been finished. It was a 2-part building, and the back part never got built, which included the parking and some more office space. The city, when it was approved, did not require a formal unity of title between the two parcels. So when it fell into bankruptcy and foreclosure, part of it was sold off, part of it wasn't. So
The 1-story building behind it and just south of it.
that was old. That was going to be torn down. There was going to be
Right. Okay, that's the piece.
So that project never got finished. The casino project, which I was involved with to some degree, the elements that would have gotten it certified were value engineered out to ensure that it met the $6 million budget cap. And so unfortunately, that did not meet the requirements to get LEED certified.
Okay, so what would happen though if we granted the sustain, because these are fairly significant, when you're talking about 50%, I mean, these are big things we're giving away if we just have decided to do this. What happens if they don't? The building is up.
There are several things. We have to write better entitlement orders, and that's why this is here, so we can hold people accountable. Much of it, the pre-commissioning and the LEED certification initial pieces should be able to be provided to the city at the time or right before the building gets a certificate of occupancy. Much of the financing of new buildings is predicated on that issuance of certificate of occupancy. So they might get a temporary certificate of occupancy, while they get their lead ducks in a row, because the building has to be finished and has to be commissioned. If they don't provide it, we can hold off giving them their CO and their financing could be in jeopardy. The other option is if they don't make it or if something tragic happens, then the value that the lead certification or green globes or well building that was being met through that certification would then need to come into the form of a check to the city for that amount, equal to that amount, that would be placed in the sustainable bonus incentive program. So the example that I gave, if somebody met their $750,000 requirement through lead certification and they didn't make it, and for whatever reason they couldn't do it, then they owe us $750,000 to put in the sustainable bonus program before the certificate of occupancy could be issued.
And we have to sue them to get that.
I don't think we necessarily have to,
So I mean, that, yeah, the worst case scenario is somebody says, I'm not doing it.
and then you won't get a CO.
And
Because the CO is attached to the development order. The development order specifies what you have to do, and if you don't do it, you're sort of, I mean, much of what we have, just take a burden off of staff, is developer driven. If your developer makes poor decisions, they're gonna pay for it, not the city. And that's how it was set up in the very beginning, was have it be as predictable and consistent as it could be, because the onus is on the developer to perform. And the developer doesn't perform, they're held accountable.
Okay, see Commissioner, thank you. I see Commissioner Leg has a question.
Given inflation and the cost of materials rising, where are we in line at the $7.50 a square foot and $15? I mean, these were relevant 2 years ago, but where are they now?
It feels vague. It feels like a vague number that
Well, I
just,
just want to make sure that it's comparable and compatible to what other cities and municipalities and counties are
Cities don't
using.
have a predictable process like we do. Several cities have copied our sustainable bonus program and do not put a dollar value on what they have to do in it.
So how do they run it?
They run it in, and I'm not denigrating any particular city, many of them aren't, oh, well, did the developer do a nice job for the city? Is it gonna benefit the city, which is very subjective. We wanted something objective so that
Yeah.
we could hold them, okay, you have to do this amount. And the dollar value based on today's construction values is probably a little low, but at the same token, land values and construction values have become so high, we're having a difficult time getting developers to invest in the first place. The market is just so skewed right now.
is that
So
still true? I mean, really, is that still true? We've got the Sierra buildings going up.
We got Nestor. I mean, there's a lot
We
of.
don't have, one of our challenges is we don't have much open land in the city.
right.
So it seems like, I don't know, it seems like the development is sort of picking up a little bit.
We have more projects than we've had in the past.
Yeah.
but The cost of construction has delayed several projects.
Mhm.
When they will break ground or not, I don't know. The Bexley is one of them. Deco Green would like to get started. I know that in the 2 years since that started, the construction costs of that project probably have gone up by at least 35–40%, but they're able to sort of keep it, I think, going, but the marketable rents are probably going to skew more to the more expensive side now. And one of the things we've tried to advocate for all along is that Lake Worth Beach has a microcosm of a market. And so our market is more in the affordable workforce range. And we'd like to see housing that benefits those who live here. And maybe they make a little bit more than that. Some developers may decide to hold off because the rents they will need to justify the expense
Aren't gonna make
there's not a
that.
history there, and that's kind of why the mid was so subsidized, because there was no market for a project like that.
Well, they were the first, yeah, they were the first ones
on the
to.
waiting list. Now they have a waiting list for the Bohemian, and that one has, maybe Joan, how many affordable units are in the Bohemian?
44.
44, and we just have a project from the same developers as the Deco Green have just submitted an entitlement project, which we'll see in a few months, for what's called East Lake Worth Station. And I think 36, which is almost half the units, are going to be in the exchange program as affordable.
So in your opinion, you think that we're in line at this $7.50 and $15 a square foot? I think a $7.50 a square foot at $200 a square foot is like it's a microcosm. And I trust your expertise in making sure that we are in line, that we're not leaving money on the table, and that we're also holding investors accountable for this density or increase in what they want. So I would hope that you or your staff would come to us and say, okay, we think that in this next schedule of fees, we need to maybe look at raising it to $9 a square foot or whatever. So I just want to,
We will be looking at schedule of fees and charges. Like for instance, TDRs in West Palm Beach are running, that's transfer development rights, are running around $20 a square foot. Ours are at 15.
big discrepancy for one
Yeah.
city over.
But the type of project that it can incorporate the TDRs in West Palm are projects that can generate $2,000 for one bedroom unit. And so we don't have that here. And we would like to try to keep our projects affordable to some degree. So if we charge the same rates like what Miami does or West Palm Beach does, the developer's going to expect the same rental rates or sales rates as what they would get in those two localities. And the whole thing is a marrying of trying to keep it in the world that sort of preserves the interesting intrinsic nature of Lake Beach. We don't want to become a new Palm Beach. The cultural diversity and economic diversity of the city, I think, makes it really interesting because there's some of everybody here. And I don't think that at least I've heard from most people that they don't want to see that go away. They like to try to keep that cultural, social, economic, and ethnic diversity and richness in the city.
So are you thinking of raising it? Because you just compared us to West Palm, so,
I'm looking at, we probably will be proposing to raise it some.
okay.
And
Okay.
sort of my understanding of some of this is we kind of have two layers. We have what a developer has by right that goes with the zoning or the LDRs, and I always get that mixed up. And then there are a couple ways to bump that up, either with a plan development of some sort, and then sustainability bonus maybe on top of that. Or sometimes they're in parallel. This stuff gets messy.
Parallel.
Okay, parallel then. And both of those, by right number of stories needs to work with what we're comfortable with, but also there needs to be a maximum when you do all those other things, when the developer does all those things, that we can also live. That we ran into that with Deco Green, that they bumped it up then to 7 stories, and we all kind of went, gee, that's kind of high. So we want to think about that. And then I think what you're saying is, as you think about what to ask from the developers to go from the by right to the benefited version, let's call it, if the bump of that is too onerous, nobody will do it. Or no developer will do it. So there's a back pressure on it that we want to be conscious of also. Obviously, if we're going to use those funds to help maybe subsidize other affordable or workforce things, then we want to get as much as the market will bear without scaring people away. I assume that's kind of the waves that we want to be surfing that edge.
Yes.
Okay.
I had one comment. I see Commissioner Stokes, but I just want to say, along the lines of, development is sort of a double-edged sword in our town. We love it and we hate it. Some people love it more and some people hate it more. One of the things that I was thinking about, because, as right now, all the, the big apartment buildings that are going up, not one cottage has been destroyed, right? There was a decision for whatever reason years ago for the west side of Dixie Highway not to be the neighborhoods there not to be deemed historic, which I think leaves them much more vulnerable than, and correct me if I'm wrong, somebody, leaves them much more vulnerable to demolition, to being, by somebody buying a chunk, there's different people kind of looking like different people, but they buy up a whole block and now they've got a block and now they can tear it down. So I do think that there's an intrinsic value. I've lived, it's a great little area. There are great little cottages that are just like Lake Worth. So my thought would be to, at some point for this commission, and I'm just throwing it out there, to sort of revisit that issue of the west side of the city. Some, not all, but, neighborhoods the way they did it on the east side.
Well, one of the reasons I believe it was left out is that during the survey work of this paper by the federal government in the 80s, much of the area west of Dixie, which has historically been lesser affluent than the eastern part of the city, there were so many demolitions over the course of time that the minimum number of units of historic properties, which are 50 years older or older and hold their original intrinsic value, that they couldn't really identify in a historic district. And there were some individual buildings that were important, but there were not a collection enough, old enough to identify a historic district. Now, fast forward, the fact that those were done in the eighties and nineties, we didn't designate properties until the 2000s.
Right.
And then we resurveyed everything that's in historic district as of 2 years ago. And then now there's a newer list, and a lot of the resources in the 50s and 60s, which would not have been
Right.
considered historic in the 80s, 90s, are now old enough.
We're all
And
getting
so
older.
one thing we could look at is having an updated survey done of the western part of the city to see where I think Vernon Heights, I hope they don't kill me, Vernon Heights is one of, I think, the earliest sort of planned developments in Lake Worth Beach. Is that appropriate to be designated an historic district? There are areas of Tropical Ridge and Royal Point Sand that might qualify. The whole neighborhood won't, but parts of it would.
I think Lake Avenue, A, B, C, D, E, there's a lot of little cottages down there when you drive around. They really, so I mean, I don't know what the answer is, but, and that survey then includes, there's a cost to that survey?
But the state helped pay for most of it. We are a certified local government, and they have a granted aid, which doesn't require any cash match. We matched with a little bit of money and staff time. And so I think over the course of 4 or 5 years, we were able to resurvey all of the city's local historic districts.
So on the, where you were looking, so do you do like a chunk at a time?
We will prioritize where we might go. And we did the, I think we did College Park first because there was a substantial number of properties in that time period. Now, what came out of it, which we haven't acted on, which is another whole workshop, is that there are lists of buildings that could be considered contributing now versus non-contributing, that we would have to redesignate the historic district in order to move them from the non-contributing status to contributing. We have had some people ask for individual movement of their buildings to contributing, mostly because they're in the floodplain and they could not do substantial rehab without their historic preservation exemption. So they asked for their building to be reclassified. And so that information is all there. Keep in mind that our preservation planner just started, and we have our other preservation position. We're still trying to find somebody. But we have a really good consultant that's helping us maneuver historic preservation.
So is that thing we can look at in the future to,
I see Kim's like, but
yeah, Kim's next,
can we just pick,
but that would be Kim next.
So, well, mine's not about the historic stuff.
Okay,
yeah, so I was gonna answer. your
Yeah,
question.
sure.
So instead of doing a percentage or a block, is there a way to do any home built prior to X that meets A, B, and C would be a historical home? That way we could preserve that home?
Okay, well, any building that's over 50 years old or older by its age is considered historic. The next criteria is it significant for some reason, either association with a person, its architecture, it's reminiscent of some particular craftsmanship, does it have archaeological value? And those are in our preservation ordinance. So if somebody wanted, even the west of Dixie, wanted their house designated, and it met 50 years old, it could be newer than 50 if it had some really major reason, like Elvis Presley's house was designated on the National Register before 50 years old because it was associated with him.
No, but I mean the opposite, like if I bought a home and I wanted to knock it down, is there something protecting a home on D Street that was built in 1951?
No, not unless it's designated, and we do go through the public notice process.
Okay, so we couldn't just make,
they could all come down.
they could, that's what I'm saying, we can't just protect them based on the year instead of doing a whole, that's my question. Okay, thank you.
So,
Well, my question was more back to the, trying to keep things affordable. And this was a concern that I had when we first heard all those developments. Every developer kept saying, we're in the workforce range. And it was like, for how long? And then fast forward a year later, we're seeing what's happening to the rents. So we're making an effort to help the developers be able to build in a way that they can to keep rents reasonable for our residents. But they don't have to. So they can build all that, and then 2 years later, they can, increase their rent. There's nothing to stop them from increasing their rent.
Well, that's our either next conversation tonight or the next one, the affordable housing program. Do you want to go ahead? And
No, but I just wonder we're keeping it at $7.50 per square foot because we don't want to increase it because then they'll be priced out of the affordable range, which I agree with, but right now, there's nothing stopping them from doing it at $7.50 a square foot and then charging if they don't go through the actual designation of workforce housing or any of the other types of programs. Is that possible since it's our own? Well, I know we're going to get into that, but just for any project that participates in our sustainable bonus program.
That is a proposal that's coming in the affordable housing program, that a certain percentage of the units, regardless of what sustainable bonus tier you're in, will have to be designated or be restricted to be out of the affordable workforce. So we're getting there.
I guess enforcement's a question.
They have to provide reports to us.
Like every year. Okay.
Every year that it doesn't meet it, you, it's a penalty in the order. I forgot how much, but I think it's $10 per square foot per unit. So for 800 square foot unit, you're paying $8,000 penalty to the city that your unit, and it's not, it's based on every year it doesn't comply,
Right.
not just once.
Good answer.
Oh, I think it'll work. And if you get in the program, you better play right, or you're gonna be writing a big check to the city, and Alyssa's gonna be very busy. Helping me enforce it.
Commissioner McBoy, you have a light on.
Back to the historic one. I hear you, Mayoress, on the idea that it seems a little odd that we don't provide any protection west of Dixie where we provide quite a bit east. So I agree with that concern. The thing that pops into my head is that I hear a lot of noise from folks east of Dixie that the historic program and working with it gets quite onerous for people and sometimes quite expensive. So if we were to expand it, I would want to make sure that we try to look at that, what we're doing so far, figure out how that would work west of it and find some way. And there's also a balance that I hear a lot is the balance between doing environmentally sensible things on the houses versus keeping it historically faithful gets to be I mean, we've seen some of them with the window glazing, percent visibility, whatever it's called, or with roof types or solar panels or whatever. So if we were to move forward that way.
It sounds like as we talk about that, you'd have some suggestions.
Well, there is an accepted preservation practice of conservation. And I forgot the lady's name, helped me write a new preservation orders for West Palm Beach. It included 3 tiers. One was landmark status, for like the superior, historic district or building, preservation district, and then the conservation district there was interest in a number of lesser affluent neighborhoods to have some level of protection, but not be as onerous as it would be in traditional preservation. So there was a conservation district category created. It wasn't adopted by the commission in West Palm, unfortunately, but that's what you're talking about. It focuses more on the overall feeling and ambiance and general mass bulk and arrangement of the buildings, but doesn't get into all the nitty-gritty, like the windows have to be a certain way. And it may be very conducive to the areas that we're talking about that don't necessarily have the means at the eastern part of the city to invest in the same type of housing.
That I'm not familiar with that, so that's good to know.
I mean, there's odd anomalies with the historical, on the side streets where it seems not quite as important, things that folks can't do because
Yeah, thanks for bringing up that example because that's a huge complaint I've gotten from a lot of people. And there was kind of the comment earlier about are we pushing away investors and developers from projects and maybe not on bigger projects, but at least especially in historic homes and cottages. I've heard from a number of local developers who have been discouraged and frustrated because the home, they're running into obstacles with the historic stuff. So that's definitely something we need to iron out because I certainly, am a history buff and I can appreciate historic homes, but also realistically, we should allow developers and homeowners to bring their historic homes to a modern standard. I mean, we talk often about people saving money on their electric bills and things like that. And so we need to allow them to, have modern windows and insulation and so on and so forth. I had a question on the 750 because you had mentioned or described it as it's something extra. So I'm curious on how is that measured for, especially something so LEED certification, of course, is, I won't call it the gold standard, but it's definitely a very popular one. Energy efficiency, how do you determine that 750 is extra if it's something that the home is already, or the project is already going to need, say insulation or whatever standard or criteria they're going for, what separates the 750, what's being used for as extra as opposed to something that's already going to be used in the construction, and the developer or the builder is just deciding to use, better material or something that's more efficient to meet the standard.
Okay, well, the sustainable bonus program, the value has to be something in the project that is not currently required by code. So if you, and under LEED, and this is where the challenge is, you have to create a building that has a significantly better energy performance. I think the minimum you qualify is 5 or 10%, and you get points based on how much better it does in the energy code in Florida. The recycled materials, and there's a whole array of categories. It's not just one thing, energy conservation. It's recycled materials, indoor air quality, commissioning, which means you're testing the building to make sure it's performing the way you would like it to perform. There are site requirements, water reuse, and also reduction. And all of that percentages that as you get the percentage of improvement over the requirement of the code gets greater and greater, you get more points. And the more points you get, you can go from certification to green, to gold designation, or platinum, or silver. And so LEED covers such a broad array of things that most any project incorporating all the requirements for LEED and getting the certification would far exceed that 750 value. We don't allow, for instance, we have people say, I'm going to put in LED lights. Great.
So what?
It's not going to count.
Yeah.
If you put in bigger species of trees, it will count the value. And we do a spread. We ask them to provide a spreadsheet. Tree A is 4-inch caliper at 6 feet in height costs X. I'm going to have it a 6-inch caliper at 5 feet. It costs Y. The differential will count that value. And so that it's an objective, quantifiable number to get to. And so that's how we've done it so far. And if it's public art, the art piece has a value. If you're doing an open square or an amenity that's open to the public, it has a construction value. And so we use it that way. So we haven't let people piecemeal things. You either get a certification or you don't. And that's not what's been so far. Because I don't want to get into nickel and dime and trying to figure out, I'm going to recycle carpet. Great.
Yeah. Go in there and check.
Yeah, and my understanding, so LEED is basically focusing on energy and water and conservation. Green Globes is kind of like a very general purpose, right? And the WELL certification is more human-centric, healthiness.
Well, they all take into account where the materials come from, the carbon, embodied carbon of it being constructed, its transportation to the site, indoor air quality, experienced by the individual, because LEED has various different components. It's got new construction, preservation, there's LEED neighborhoods, there's LEED interiors, there's LEED maintenance and operations. Green Globe is easier to quantify and covers a broader array of things from cradle to cradle, and WELL gets into everything in terms of all those things, plus the experience of the user and their quality of either living there, working there, or inhabiting the space. And so they kind of build on each other, but LEED was the first one, and people are most familiar with it, but I kind of like Green Gloves because it's much easier for the lay person to understand how you get to the certification.
Any other questions? Where do we leave off?
Okay.
So go ahead.
So we went through what you can get with the sustainable bonus program in terms of incentives and increases. So we went through the various things that what you can incorporate in your site, the LEED certification, Green Gloves, Florida Green Building, Florida Preservation. The code also has in it other areas where you could the value of creating an additional open space beyond what the code requires. Additional landscape, and I don't know how to get rid of that little black thing across the front of it, but we've had projects that are proposed, including public amenities. What is the cost of creating a law enforcement substation? That could meet your sustainable bonus requirement. There is a possibility that a developer or designer could come up and be creative. And the United States Green Building Council's LEED program has a neighborhood development that has a whole host of things that can be incorporated to achieve sustainable design. And an array of those are listed at the bottom in the purple. And so if you did some really interesting solid waste recycling system for the public and the value we incorporated, it might meet sustainable bonus. And so we haven't had anybody be overly creative, but workforce housing is the way to meet it. Banyan Court is a totally affordable project. It required sustainable bonus. Because the whole project is affordable, we said, okay, it meets the sustainable bonus requirement by default, because there will be no way to provide more affordable housing than every unit being affordable. That's the only one that's been completely affordable in terms of that.
Can I just say something
I'm
else?
sorry.
The only thing that I don't like on this list is a public parking garage in which the city writes a check and pays for it. That to me is the opposite of a public parking garage. So that is one thing that I would like. I personally would love to see this stay on, but without the city writing a check to build the public parking garage. So if that's the case, then we should just own it and we should collect the parking space on it. It's number 7 on that list.
I would agree that I have a concern about, my concern might be slightly different. I'm not keen on parking in general, but certainly I would agree with that concern of.
Because what we would pay 2.5 million for the Bohemian
It's coming to you shortly.
and 150,000 a year in
Forever.
perpetuity. I'm like, that's something that I'm not in favor of. Just, if we're gonna build a parking garage, we can build it, we can own it, in my opinion. I don't think that we should give somebody density based on that, but
Speaking of that, there was mobility things mentioned as well, and
Yes.
are we gonna be talking about, working towards a mobility plan so that when we have these developers come, we know exactly what we want or need from them?
There, it is in the budget, proposed in the budget to request funding for a mobility plan that will identify projects or components or infrastructure that a developer could build on behalf of the city or incorporate in a project in the furtherance of mobility. The Bohemian did incorporate a little tidbit of it in terms, they've got a lift, like lounge close to the parking garage at the back of their building. That was looked at as a place that, people that increases mobility and the less need for getting your car out of the garage and driving around, because you've got a place where is identified that Lyft or Uber would come, or some other private provider will come pick you up and take you someplace. That's mobility in its infancy. They put it out
I like that. Feeder stage.
It's ever growing, and we do have at some point soon, we're going to ask a lady from WGI, Lisa, who is a mobility guru, to come speak to you in about a 10-minute presentation and give you the ins and outs of this mobility. We've had a little program here twice, and it's growing beyond just getting people around. It's now talking about goods and services. And though we're not going to be affected by that directly tomorrow, but the day after tomorrow, we probably are. This is getting at automated vehicles and deliveries by drones and all this other stuff. And she's very quite charismatic, and it'll be interesting to see where mobility is going in bigger cities and determining what aspects of it we feel are appropriate for Lake West Beach, because it's coming. We might as well try to be ready for it.
It was interesting last night. I was leaving my office and a couple of people were parking in the free parking lot behind my, and there's a lot of sort of confusing signs about Toga. And they had their credit card out. They were like, I stopped them. I said, "You look confused." And she said, "Well, we're looking how to pay for it." I was like, hold that thought.
Right.
Yeah, it was interesting because it was like really people.
They expect to pay,
That's right.
especially if they're not from around here.
Okay.
So there's to answer some more questions. A developer who does not want to participate in the program by actually incorporating amenities can write a check to the city, and we establish a sustainable bonuses in a trust account. 2 projects have paid into it. I think the 3rd one is getting ready to. I think the amount is right at $50,000. You, as the commission, are the ones who look at what's in the account and decide how it will be spent. And it has a very broad array of items to spend. It can be on infrastructure, it could be on affordable housing. Since you adopted a resolution whereby half the money is going to be spent, has to come in the form of a check. Let's say a developer wanted to come forward and say, "I want to do affordable housing." You could say possibly, "Okay, well, we will forego that half payment to the city. In return, you're going to deed restrict X number of units for that money," just as an example.
And how does that, is that like 750 square foot? I mean, I'm just having a little trouble picturing how do you tell them how much to write the check?
Well, every square foot above the second floor has a dollar value to it. So on the base tier, you multiply 750 times the floor plate of each building. We also look at if it's incorporating density, we look at the average unit size of those additional units and multiply that by 750. Or if you do FAR, floor area ratio, which is also a square footage increase, the additional above the base is multiplied by 750. And whatever is the largest number we go with.
Okay.
And then when you get into the plan development, and you get to the next tier, it's by 50, it's times by 15.
Okay.
A list of different things that sustainable bonus trust funding money can be spent on is acquisition of land and parking facilities and transit, recreational opportunities, gateways, corridors, all types of things. And you actually dictate how that is spent. It could be like a mini sustainable bonus capital improvement program. There are going to be 3 projects coming through now that we have to pay you all. I don't really know what the whole dollar amount is, but I'm sure it's among the 3, it's probably close to $250,000 in sustainable bonus money when we add it all up.
Excuse me, Lynn, who makes these rules on where that money can be spent? Is that state mandated, federal? So
It's your ordinance.
if there's something that we didn't like in here, we can say, you know, what, we want to add this and take this out.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure because it's finances and I want to make sure that there's not somebody else we have to list it.
And there are some things that could be, if something that you would like to spend money on is not on the list, there is a catch-all that kind of like, you know, for the public good of
For the good of the public.
Number 13, any other project you can apply to provide as a benefit, blah, 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 enhance quality of life,
Okay.
sustainability. So you all decide how that money is spent. Things that you parameter is missing, we can definitely broaden it if the other incentive program that was adopted through the comp plan in 2018 was creating a bank of developable rights from the city's underused rights on historic properties and part of 1900. And that bank originally had about 1 million square feet that a developer could buy from the city. At the time, it was $10 a square foot. It's now 15. And what that allows east of Dixie Highway is to increase your density by 10% for your intensity, which is your floor area ratio. And then west of Dixie Highway, we can increase your density by 10%. You can increase your height by 1 story, but of no more than 15 feet. And you can also increase your intensity by 10%. So that has been utilized on 2 projects so far, Bohemian and Deco Green. The Bohemian bumped up its density to 200 units an acre for this program. It did not add an extra floor because it's actually at 7 floors now. And I believe at the TOD location, there's a potential to get to 8. And then Deco Green bumped up its density to, I think it's 55 units an acre, if I'm not mistaken. The Bohemians was waived. The Deco Green one, that payment is due imminently because they're looking to get a building permit for some site improvements. The last project.
I'm sorry, did you say we waived?
Yeah, that's, I think.
Don't just skate over that. Wait.
Quickly.
We waived, the city waived that, but agreed to paying $2.5 million for a garage.
Yes.
Wow, guess there's a reason why we're sitting up here. Okay.
Can you add any further
Insight?
It may be best if I meet with you individually and the city manager to catch her up to date, but the sustainable bonus requirement was waived as well. However, what they've incorporated in their project probably would have met it at a bare minimum, but the TDRs were waived, the cost of those, and then we decided to invest in the parking garage.
Are they gonna be paying us taxes once they open, or do they get a 10-year?
Oh, they don't have 10 years, they probably have about 8 years. Just for the county.
They will be paying lots of new utility bills.
Let's hope.
So
How much of that, you said we had 1 million, how much of that is left? Do you know?
About 940,000 square feet.
Okay, so we're still sitting good.
We looked at this a long time. So, we haven't had any projects as of, I thought that the Gulfstream, the way it was originally coming in, was going to participate in the TDR program, but it ended up not needing them. It's actually well below the floor area ratio that's allowed for this panel bonus program. So again, right now, how the TDR program is written up is the money that comes into that program can only be spent on infrastructure. Commissioner Stokes and I talked quite a bit about it would not be very difficult to change the resolution that created to allow it to also go toward the creation and
Acquisition of development.
so we could definitely, one thing on the table is to change how that TDR money can be spent. And again, it comes to you. We will have a little over $500,000 in the TDR bank, hopefully by the end of the fiscal year. And one of the items we can talk about when we get to where we're going is how you might like to see that money spent, or did you want it to like just leave it in the trust fund and let it accumulate a little bit more until there's a bigger project you want to do or something.
But we're anticipating 1.7 from the Deco Green.
That's, the Deco Green is, I think, paying $227,000.
They said $250,000.
And the Bex has already paid about $250,000. So that's what we have in the TDR program trust fund right now.
The what has paid $250,000? The,
Bex,
Bexley.
oh,
about what
Yeah.
they went ahead and entitled their project. a few
But you
months ago.
said 3 projects are gonna come online and we'll have some in the sustainable.
bonds.
And we're expecting that to be
well,
close.
we went over, we approved whatever it was on the
Yeah.
last one. Yeah. I don't remember the number.
But you said like 1.5 million or no? How, 750,000? What did you say?
We're very good.
The projects that have been coming in, there's some that have come in recently per your change in sustainable bonus, and that's Lake Worth Station, Detroit Street Apartments, whatever the Village of Valor is called now, it's got a new name, I can't remember what it's called, and one other one. So among the 3 or 4 of those, I would think that at the 750, it may be as much as another $250,000 that will go into sustainable bonus trust account. So you'll have about 275,000. But they don't pay, well, we're requiring them to pay it so they can get their project entitled, which means that the vesting's all there and you can just move forward with your project. And so when they actually pay, but they have to pay no later than when their building permit is issued. So when those developments get approved in the pipeline and when they choose to pay their sustainable bonus, we'll see.
Did you say $900,000 about a few minutes
We
ago?
have 900,000 square feet left in the trust, the
In our,
TDR.
Yeah.
an hour, okay,
So,
Square feet.
thank you.
Lots of big numbers, but lots of zeros running around.
right.
None of them coming to us, unfortunately.
So again, you can just direct how the money is utilized in the TDR program, and we would like to propose bringing forward a resolution to let you do acquisition or buying down or encouraging affordable housing and workforce housing. We have a couple of little programs that are not necessarily part of the LDRs, but have been incorporated and utilized for the incentivization of private investment. One is the Economic Investment Incentive Agreement Program, which looks at the first 3 years of new revenues to the utilities, which are electric, water, sewer, and stormwater. And it was envisioned that a percentage, a small one, of the new projected revenue would be paid to the developer to encourage a project. The total amount to the mid was about $169,000. The Bohemian's going to be in the 150s. And I believe the Gulfstream is knocking at the door of like 130. That again is done through a schedule of fees and charges. Right now, I believe it's about 9 cents a square foot for the water sewer combined, 4.5 cents a square foot for stormwater. And this is air conditioned space, and the electric is maybe at 15 or 20 cents a square foot. And that might change based on the rate studies we're doing. And that check is written, we change the program. We don't write that check until the project's been performing for 3 years. To ensure that they don't have to pay us back something. Right now, the mid is performing better than anticipated. So if it continues down that road, it will get its check after it's been operating for 3 years, which is about 2 years from now.
So is this some sort of a guarantee that they'll make that level of use?
They have to put a bond up too, don't they?
Well, some of them are having difficulty putting the bond up, so what we decided to do, and you all have approved it with the mid, is that we'll pay you the money at the end of the 3 years versus the beginning. So if your
Right.
project doesn't perform, we give you the percentage based on how your performance was. If your project performs better, you only get what we agreed to originally. We pocket the difference.
Okay.
And makes it a little easier for the developer.
Commissioner Stokes.
Other than just existing and renting out their units, is there anything else that they're giving to the city to get this incentive?
No.
So
This is all based on new utility
Right.
running.
I don't agree with any of this, just to put that out there, because we happen to own our own water and electric utilities here. So we can provide this to developers, but if they were gonna go develop in the city next door, they are gonna build units and they're gonna rent them out, and their customers are going to pay FP&L and whoever else, and they're not gonna get any money back. So I just don't see this as necessary.
I don't know why I don't understand this at all, really.
I'm not a fan of this either, so I'm glad that you put your light on. I did not, I am not a fan of this. And especially when you look at, I mean, yes, we need it to spark interest in Lake Worth Beach. We are the city to be in now. We are less than a mile from the ocean. We have plenty of big spots still available on Dixie and Federal Highway. I kind of feel like I'm glad we're having this conversation, because when you couple all the giveaways and look at how much money, I mean, yes, we want bodies. I'm a business owner. I want bodies in the city, but at the same time, this out of every presentation, along with the dog parks and putting in pools and giving them bonuses on a pool that they're going to help sell their properties on or rent their properties. I'm a big fan of saying we need to nix this program.
I mean, yeah, I mean, a lot of these things seem to have, years ago were started because we were begging them, and I think a lot of concessions, as I drive up Dixie Highway and see some of the things that, were allowed to happen. We were like the redheaded saying, please come and develop, I mean, no disrespect to anybody, please come and develop us because we need it, but we're in a different posture now, I think.
Yeah.
And I
Have consensus to nix this?
I feel the same way. I've expressed it before, that I don't like the idea. To me, it builds an incentive to use more as opposed to conserve more. So it's kind of going backwards on the whole lead.
I'm okay with that.
Is that?
We have differing opinions about if that's good or not.
Economically, it's great. Environmentally, it's awful. So
It's a separate discussion for our
Yeah.
We're
utility.
not going to do it tonight.
In deference to utilities, we run a pro forma based on how we feel the project will run environmentally. Because I don't necessarily look at it as an incentive to use more. The better you operate your building, the smaller your incentive is going to be, but it's based on a industry standard. Now, the only two projects that have utilized this program are the Bohemian and the Mid.
Same developer, investor.
There is the Advantis is interested in it, I believe, but I told them that they really needed to figure out how to give something more to the city. If they were going to come back and ask for this incentive here, it would behoove them to actually do some deed restriction on some of their units.
I really don't understand what this incentive is. I mean, to start out.
It was a way to give some cash to a developer without cash out of hand to help with the soft cost of developing a project.
We pay them for what we think they're going to spend and they give it back to us later.
For our future utility customers.
Yes.
Right.
But
Ooh,
they can't
They're gonna-
rent out units without giving us utility customers.
Right, they're gonna have utility customers anyway. So
Guarantee.
they're betting against us.
We only give this money if the meters are running, and we were going to give a little percentage of that back to the developer and encourage those meters to put online.
I would rather take that money and give it to our residents with free light bulbs and free air filters for their air conditionings than give it to, I mean, personally, than give it to an investor. That's just, I know we
It's
can't
not
make
easy.
motions or anything right now.
It's not a big deal. You're saying it's not.
Easy to sunset it,
Yeah.
and we could just put it,
Note to attorney.
Note to attorney.
And we just have something separate that's tied to job creation.
yes.
So that's why I was wondering, what additional thing is this bringing to our city, which was nothing?
You can't mix the two. The
Okay.
job creation one and this one, you can't.
Right.
You can't double dip.
And if you do solar or other things that will reduce your energy load, you can't utilize this program either, or it gets reduced by 50%.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I say night.
Yeah, I mean, the feedback we're getting, and none of us, not one of us is a developer, but I think the generosity that we've shown. Next.
We also have infrastructure investment incentive, and what we've noticed, with some of this, is still fairly applicable, is that the city's capital improvement program has scheduled improvements for stormwater, water, sewer, and electric. Sometimes a project coming along, and mid was one, that needed to have the electrical improvements that were coming in a future year, and water sewer improvements that were coming in a future year to happen now versus later. Incentive was set up that the developer could put those infrastructure improvements in or install them on our behalf, and we would pay them back. And then move the schedule up faster. It's been fairly successful. It has encouraged some things to happen. Now, what is not on here is that if your infrastructure improvements are not part of the 5-year CIP, you're kind of stuck with the bill. And so far, no developer has come in and had to have a major electrical upgrade or water sewer or stormwater upgrade that was not already in the CIP or was already scheduled. So that hasn't hit us with that. And so, and this project, the Mid and the Bohemian have both utilized it to some degree, and the Gulf Stream is looking at it as well. Deco Green could have qualified for a little piece of it, but they didn't go for it. And then no other project, to my knowledge, has requested it. That there may be one coming associated with working with Jones projects around Lake of Lucerne. There's some issues with the alley, and so there's some improvements being proposed of that project, which you haven't seen yet, might utilize it, but it wouldn't be a very big number.
But they're towards infrastructure that we probably should do anyway, because we have very.
It's already part of our capital improvement.
It has to be, okay. Commissioner Stokes.
I have a question about our 5-year capital improvement plan.
I'll try to answer. Maybe I won't be able to.
No pop quizzes. Yeah.
Okay, and this is something that we can bring back later by all means. How realistic is it that we're gonna do everything on this list in 5 years? So I just wonder if there's something on year 5 of this plan, it's getting bumped up to present day. Was that really like year 8, 9, 10 by the time we're gonna get around to funding it, and it bumps everything else on the list down?
Have we seen a list, that list?
Well, the validity of a capital improvement plan is it must be defensible, and that certain things happen in an order, especially with STRIP, with the electric. There are certain improvements in Hardin that happen first. I know that Ed has talked about it, why some of the improvements couldn't happen, say, in College Park first, because the whole way of getting there was still weak and needed to be improved first, so it moves out. So things are phased and should be adopted in a specific order. The capital improvement program, at least since I've been at the city now 11.5 years, has improved greatly, where what's in the plan makes better sense and it has real numbers by it. The utility, water, sewer, stormwater, electric have all spent a great deal of time and effort making and ensuring that that capital improvement program is defensible and is established and adopted by you on an annual basis, so that it can even, it's worked, and we've gotten a lot of grant monies, especially for the water and the sewer from it, because we have a program that is defensible with a plan to get it implemented versus just projects that are listed randomly, and if they happen, great, they don't happen.
That includes roads too, because I look at some of the roads that are around our upcoming developments, and they don't look like they're in as bad condition as many more roads in the city. So I'm like, were we really gonna get to that road in 5 years? That means we would have gotten through all the other roads first.
Now, some of the roads that may not have looked the worst had infrastructure that was in bad shape. Like 17th Avenue North needed to have water sewer work done, which was torn up the street. So as that became a bigger project, do it once and do it right.
Yeah.
So that got resurfaced probably a little sooner than others because there was so much other work happening around it that would affect the road surface.
All right, that makes sense. Last question, is the Gulf Stream participating with all the money they're asking for infrastructure improvements from us in the CRA? Is that part of this incentive, or is that just something else?
There's $250,000 for water sewer improvements that I think falls under this incentive for the Gulf Stream. That's it. The $1,000 streetscape. $1 million.
I'm like, 1,000, yes, we renegotiated. I was like, you're getting one bush.
I can donate all the bromeliads in the world.
Oh, I'll take some.
I got 'em.
The $1 million streetscape was outside this project because there was no 5-year capital improvement program thing for the streetscape. It's just the water sewer that will be done. And the electrical work was already being scheduled, and we're going, Ed and his group like to take care of it themselves and not dump it on the developers, so they can do it in their own timeframe.
So we're just doing some infrastructure that probably needs to be done anyway.
So that is it for, I'm just giving you a reminder, because not everybody realizes what other government documents we have in terms of how the future of place happens. But we have our major thoroughfare design guidelines, the Arts and Cultural Master Plan, the Historic Preservation Design Guidelines, and all of those work together to support each other to ensure that the quality of development is as good as it can be. And what's attached to your backup, and this came from discussions with both Commissioner Boyd and Commissioner Robinson, as well as I think just casual for the other review, is we have a qualitative standards for buildings in our site plan. And so I went through that and tried to figure out how best to get at the question of how can we require, because we can't do design review in and of itself or urban design. It doesn't, it's not allowed in Florida, but we can hold people to a certain standard if they are proposing a project. And so I've proposed some language changes that would hopefully induce a higher level of scrutiny and quality of design, having the massing be broken in more digestible pieces. It would serve as a complement to the major thoroughfare guidelines. What's tacked on the end are items in related to sustainability that aren't so quantifiable. I think something that was put out by Commissioner Boyd is that projects should have a improved carbon footprint or reduced greenhouse gases. I put some parameters in there, but I'm struggling with how to quantify them so that, okay, this building, like, I think there's 9 or 10 of those standards that proposed ordinance change that get at sustainability, but how do you quantify it? Because, you know, as you know, going through a project for review, it's based, the decisions based
Somebody
on.
needs to stop breathing.
Like the air system.
It's not me. But,
Who gets the short straw?
since development is based on defensible evidence, and what could that standard be? And I'm struggling with that. I'm going to try to bring something back to you that gets at that, improving the carbon footprint, utilization of recycled resources. How can you reduce greenhouse gases? But also there's other elements of sustainability in there in reference to social justice and racial equity, racial opportunities, and I'll try to put my little creative hat on and come up with something that we can quantify that ensures that projects that come in touch on all those things that are important to the Lakewood future. It may take me a little bit of time, but I'll come up with something eventually.
This, and you're referring to the things that are yellow highlighted in.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I certainly appreciate you.
Oh, it was on.
Her light was on.
Aren't we supposed to be doing lights or no?
Let's
want a free conversation?
Please wait until I call on the person whose light is on. Thank you very much. We appreciate your consideration. Commissioner Maleka.
I just want to say in regards to recycling, there's a building that I won't put the name out on Dixie Highway that's not adhering to our thoroughfare guidelines, but they are using recycling. They've taken cardboard boxes and put them in their empty windows. So instead of having the beautiful window clings that we are encouraging, a year ago, we talked about enforcing that. When I drove by this building today on Dixie Highway and saw that they literally took cardboard boxes and cut them and put them all over the windows, I was appalled because we have these thoroughfare
And
guidelines.
it's not because they're painting and they just need to block.
No, it's one of the for rents.
Oh, for rents, it's a vacant.
Yeah, so they just threw cardboard boxes, cut them up and stuck them all over the windows with a for rent sign. And I'm like, that is,
Not cool.
it's not just not cool. It's an eyesore and it's degrading to our community, and our staff has these great thoroughfare guidelines that I really, really, really want to see enforced. And enforced with finesse,
Gumption.
but with a heavy hand, because it's been long enough. I mean, it's been a year that we've been talking about this, and it looks like slumlords. Looks like people who just don't care that they're really, I mean, they're running down and they're ruining the vision of the city. Cardboard
And
boxes.
then there are the dead bougainvilleas on Dixie Highway.
Or how do you?
They're still dead a year later. I'm waiting.
They died twice.
Well-
And
I don't do anything to mine and they,
I know, this,
I were ripped up by a hurricane.
they put them in a little box and they can't survive and they're not watering them. So anyway, Mr. Waters knows what I'm talking about. It's a burr under my saddle.
So can we start enforcing those thoroughfare guidelines that are written? And you're looking at me like
We will do the best we can. We are,
short-staffed, I know.
we have 3 admin vacancies. One of them's getting filled, I think, this week. And we have 5 or 6 code officer vacancies.
Well,
So we're a little challenged.
that speaks to something. I'm not. Mr. McVoy, I see your light is on.
Thank you, thank you. I appreciate, I just want to thank William for putting a placeholder in there to try to look at some of the footprint things on carbon emissions and greenhouse gases and that sort of thing. I agree with you wholeheartedly that let's try to, as much as possible, and I kind of had that feeling through much of the yellow highlighted that we need some more quantitative.
Do you want to?
He's on the electronic backup. We don't have it in here.
Oh.
We don't get, ours isn't yellow highlighted.
Right.
That should have been printed out as part of your backup for tonight.
I would have assumed that you have printed the same thing that I have electronic.
What, like what page is that? Like, what does that look like?
Well, it says 3 of 7,
All
but
right, that's a start.
as a PDF, it's page 5.
This,
Yes.
It's
but it's
pretty
not
early on.
highlighted, is my point.
Oh,
It may be look gray, it may not be yellow.
It's not either. It's not any.
oh.
So we don't know what is or not. Yours is all highlighted pretty yellow. We have no
Oh,
idea.
I didn't.
Oh, I did that by hand.
Oh.
But I found.
No, it came that way.
Drag and click mouse.
short version. Sorry.
I don't know how it doesn't print without the yellow.
Yeah.
It's in
You know
the
why they print it in
buildings
black and white?
generally section.
Okay, so page 3 of 7, which talk about,
2 of 7, 3 of 7.
Right,
It's
but
about
what are you looking?
3, 4 pages of it. I appreciate it. I think that's late on in it. Nutrients strive to incorporate design principles, law standards. I totally agree with you that unless we make it more quantitative, it doesn't really help. How does this overlap with the lead things? Was this an attempt to make this something that would apply to all buildings yeah, okay.
And I had a question on page 4 of 7, number 16. It says all new buildings shall strive to incorporate design principles and performance standards to achieve the following. That's a little qualitative.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm struggling with, is how to quantify
Right.
that for evaluative purposes, and we'll come up with something.
So this is a draft.
This is aspirational to
Yes.
get us.
But I wanted to get your feedback on it, because
Yeah.
you and I've talked quite a bit about some things, and Commissioner Robinson and I spoke last time.
My overall sense of the whole collection was the parts at the beginning, there was a lot of discussion of harmonious, which gets very difficult.
That's in the code now.
My harmonious and Suki's harmonious might be in the key of B flat for her and in the key of E flat for me. Very difficult to measure, and I'm thinking about Le Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe and thinking, I don't think they're gonna pass the harmonious here in our city. So those, I think, in my mind, we're not quite there yet, in a number of them.
With respect to that, if I could just real quick.
Do you mind, Mr. McVoy, if I allow now, Mr. Stokes?
Just
Right.
really quick. It was suggested to me that for certain developments of a size that we actually require the developer to provide a physical 3D model of the project and the surrounding areas. Because looking, I know for me personally, when you look at all these different angles and views of the proposed development, it's hard to really see what impact and how it's going to blend in. Is that something that we can require as part of an application process
Are you
of
referring to a
something?
physical one that they bring into the?
Yeah, one that I can actually look at, oh, that's what that's gonna actually look like, not just a flat.
Those 3D
quite
real
expensive.
models
Hugely
run
expensive.
Hundreds of
Yeah,
thousands of
really?
dollars.
Oh, God, yeah.
Did you do
That's
that
why most
computer
cities
model?
have gone to a flyby with using SketchUp or 3D Studio Max or other ones where you can fly around and go up and down and you change your camera. And
So can we
if you
require
create a
that then?
movie, that we could require.
Mhm.
Okay,
That's a
something
virtual,
achievable.
because just having a paper of like a particular angle, I look at some of the
One
angles.
dimension.
When the element was proposed,
Mhm.
I looked at some of those, I'm like, that doesn't look that bad, but I think there was like a 3-lane road on one side of it. It's like, that's not what
So
that
many
property
things.
looks like.
Yeah.
It was taken, they just take it out of the context of the city. So if we're gonna say harmonious with the existing surroundings, and we need to see it in the context.
And just to see what the mass looks like. So I mean,
Yeah,
that's
That's not something that would require an ordinance change. I probably propose that if it's for plan development or one that wants incentives in innovation, that we could put it on the checklist for the universal development application and just do that as a policies and procedures component versus going through the whole. Because most of what is required for an application isn't in the LDR anyway.
Right.
Staff requires to have to evaluate it. So
I think that makes sense.
that'd be a good idea. Thank you.
I agree that the physical model is nice. I lived with an architect all the way through undergraduate. They're a lot of work and expense. So that I'm fine with the 3D computers, but I agree with that it should include
I
the
think
existing context so that you really can get a more realistic idea.
Commissioner Lega. I see you late.
Number 13, page 3 of 7, says no advertising will be allowed on any exposed amenity or facility such as benches or trash cans, trash containers. We have advertising on benches all over the city.
that's probably already because I write that.
Page number 13 on 3 of 7.
As on their property. None of us stop.
That's what I'm asking. Is this in general or is this just?
Remember, zoning only covers private property, does not cover the right of way.
Mhm.
So the items that are in the site plan quantitative standard and the other one are
Interior.
on a private piece of property.
Even though we have thoroughfare major guidelines, we can't incorporate advertising on benches into those thoroughfare guidelines
What, to like prevent it or?
Banning it?
to prevent it or ban it, yeah.
I guess we could.
There is a free speech, something that and I don't think Elizabeth remembers this, because she hasn't been with us, but there was some issue with the city's benches and the newspaper racks.
The newspaper racks years ago, yeah.
Racks, I remember that
Let me
too.
get back to you, because Christie can articulate it far better than I can, but I don't see why we couldn't.
Well, because to me, I mean, if you're not gonna allow somebody to have it in their own personal property, why are we allowing it all up and
On
down?
the other hand, let me give you let me play devil's advocate. Small business is a pretty good way to advertise.
It's not cheap.
Well,
Well, they provide the benches for free.
To the city?
To the city, yeah.
Okay,
Sorry.
wait,
it's okay.
but if, let's say I had a plumbing business and I wanted to advertise on the street on, major thoroughfare, I would pay for that.
Yeah, so you pay for the ad.
Right, yeah.
I
But
paid
it's, I mean,
$250 or $350 a month for one for the gym.
yeah, but that would be, I think, that would be like a business decision. Is it worth doing it to bring in? You're saying they don't look nice?
No, I'm just saying if we're telling in one section that you can't do it, but yet,
And we as a city do it.
but we as a city allow it all over the city, it just makes it seem like there's no, it's not equitable. It's not a fair
Yeah.
playing field. If-
That's in our code now, we can take it out of our amendment if you like.
What is in the
Which-
code?
What is number 13 is actually in the code. What is proposed to be changed is underlined, and I
Right.
highlighted in yellow the areas that those would affect, so that number 13 is already in the LDR.
But this only applies to private properties.
Right,
So we're telling people on a private property that they can't advertise on a bench or in a garbage can. But we have it all over the city because they're provided to us for free. And technically, we don't even own those streets. Because they're all on Lake and Lucerne and
I'm
Dixie.
thinking it's
Federal.
so complicated.
It's just,
Or Mr. Waters just wants to
I'm just,
talk about.
I mean, I don't.
it's easy to delete.
Things like this
Yes,
can be
ma'am.
hard to add someplace.
Yes,
though.
ma'am.
Well-
Something that like people were doing that are afraid of, because on Federal, on Dixie, you're on a major road and you have benches and you have billboards and you have things like that. So are we worried about like a development, like every garbage can has stickers of like just,
It can become aesthetically unpleasant
That's
and
right.
attractive if it just is a free for all, that you can put whatever you want on a bench or a trash.
so this is more of a
But
fail
that's
safe.
maybe a bench or trash can in the, in the development behind not all on Dixie Highway. I mean, who cares? That's my laissez-faire approach to this particular topic.
Sorry, what is that?
I guess the clarification that I think
Hang
William
on,
would probably
Carmen was
want
gonna say something.
Oh, I was just gonna mention about the advertising on benches. Also, it takes some income opportunities, advertising opportunities for the city. If should we have certain elements in the public places, it could generate revenue by advertising on some of the city properties. So you don't want to take that away. Those are opportunities we can gain revenue.
Yeah.
No, that's what I'm saying. If we can do it,
Right,
like,
oh, yeah,
I just
yeah.
feel like we shouldn't be telling people, like if Bohemian wanted to put a bench on and Mr. Diaz wants to put his water keepers thing on there and pay them, who are we to say that they shouldn't? I don't know.
I think you're looking for some consistency. Either
Correct,
we're
there's-
gonna have benches with advertising,
Or we're
and
not.
everybody gets to do it, or we're not.
And William's looking at me like, really, out of all the stuff in there,
Really?
that's what she.
Kidding me?
He's like, I'm gonna kill her.
What time is it, Ms. Malega?
There,
Uh.
it's just that, you know, there are a lot of exceptions made for the government to exercise certain activities that not everybody else can do.
But I think that has gotten us in a pickle, and I'll use the food trucks as an example of some people can do food trucks, but other people can't. And I would like to see consistency and I'll use the word that Mr. McBoy said. I think it's not equitable or fair for us to say, you can't, but we can because we're the city. That's all.
So it's like the Bohemian, if you can see the Bohemian from I-95, they can paint like a wall on and advertise to people. No, but if we remove this, could they? Like they can just advertise, they can use their buildings or facilities, anything on their property now.
Constitute a sign, we have sign regulations.
All right,
All right, and the only other question that I guess with this, if we're considering moving it, with Deco Green, part of what they were saying is we have this big green public open space. So that qualifies as they're like contributing to like public open space. And now they can turn that into a marketing opportunity.
Can't right now.
But we will.
We could, if you took
They were
that.
approved.
Does it feel as public?
They were approved.
Art, they were, because it was specifically,
Run down the road of removing it. I believe we need to put together some performance standards of how it looks, or it has to be tasteful, it needs to
Yeah.
be well maintained. This can't be anything. And I don't want to get afoul of freedom of speech and some other stuff, so
Mhm.
I will think about it a little bit.
he's gonna take it under consideration.
All I ask.
Okay,
Because sometimes we have good intentions, we open up the door
Uh-huh.
and then Pandora's.
unintended
comes out.
consequences.
I know, but
I
when
see
I
no
hear,
lights on.
when I hear from people in the city that the city does stuff but doesn't allow other people to do it, this is just one of those prime examples, that's all.
Thank you. Oh, no.
Lights on. I'm trying to.
It's because you said there was no light.
Here, I thought we were gonna move on.
There were a number of detailed things within that, and I realize now, I didn't realize fully the yellow.
I'm gonna make a suggestion.
Yeah.
Could just really in terms of,
Send my comments directly to Leo.
I think so. I think we should all do that.
I'm fine with
We could
that.
just sit here and talk for the next 2 hours.
I'm perfectly fine with that.
Frankly,
That's a good
Scarlett, I don't
suggestion.
want to do that.
Okay,
So as we see different
send them to William.
things, send them to William.
If we're totally inconsistent, William. will
They're
get
nuts,
back to us
bring them
and
back.
sort it out.
All right. All right, I think that solves
Yeah,
it.
thank you. Good suggestion.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
I think it's right this time.
I'm sorry.
Shayla, is it running on YouTube, the next PowerPoint presentation? Can you tell?
Are we on to B
It's
already?
not up as of yet.
And the next one is the affordable housing.
Yes.
I'm gonna do.
Let's take a 5-minute break.
Great.
Let's take a run upstairs.
And that'll.
And
fix
come right
whatever
back.
This is.
Right.
Right or wrong?
No, we do it wrong. Share. Oh, you already started or?
I've already started. Good.
So we just-
Yes.
It's up now.
Thank you, Shayla. That's fine. 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
See, I told you it was a DJ.
Stretches needed. I didn't realize how much.
Madam Mayor, could we unmute?
What was that?
I was asking if you would unmute. It's 6:37 and we are live again.
Thank you very much. All right. Item number B. This is just, how timely is this?
So, this one, affordable housing, Lake Worth Beach Affordable Housing Program, actually was somewhat born 3 years ago, in preparation for a meeting with Regina Baker and her staff, that I attended in January of 2018, I believe, or less 4 years from now. To put together a program that we could work with developers to provide a pipeline where affordable housing could be incorporated in the project and hopefully work with the county to help defray the cost of that. So it started then I've worked with Joan and some other people that have worked with her, the CRA, and the county to come up with a Lake Worth Beach affordable housing program that also can work in tandem with other housing programs, such as the county exchange program or low-income housing credits or other types of things. And so there's 2 tiers, and the PowerPoint presentation probably wasn't as clear because it was a bit confusing. In our comp plan now, you can get a 15% increase in density if those additional units are deed restricted as affordable.
For how long?
There is a federal standard mentioned there that is a minimum, I think, of 20 or 25 years.
20.
To stay affordable.
Yes,
And this, are you talking about multifamily or also single family?
either one.
Okay.
So that's tier 1. And so that can be utilized at any point in the project. You know, on top of the, say you combine your by right units of 30 units an acre, you got a 25% increase for sustainable bonus and got that 20 units an acre to 25. But you can multiply that by 15%. And those 15% additional units would have to be affordable. Tier 2 is what I was alluding to in our previous conversation. Any increase in density, either through TDRs or through sustainable bonus, has to have a minimum of 15% of those units deed restricted as affordable or workforce housing. So if you took to the sustainable bonus incentive program and increased your density from 30 units an acre to 45, 15% of that new total would have to be deed restricted as affordable.
So 15% of 15?
15% of the total.
Of the total, not the increase,
Not there.
Right.
The total.
the total per acre.
Yes.
And is that, where does that number come from? Is that a standard? Is that?
I was referencing the comp plan has 15%, and so I was using it as that. Some programs require 10% as a set aside, some require up to 20. There has been a preemption on some extraction when it comes to development. And so it really has to be, and I have to talk to Lucy about this. I'd like it to apply to the total density increment of the project versus just the incremental increase.
Yeah.
And there's an extraction issue, but possibly that could be a problem that the by right density, say 20 units an acre, you couldn't require any of them to be affordable, even though it was making up the difference to get to the sustainable bonus. And I'll try to figure out an easier way to explain that at some point.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I'll do my best to require as much of the total density being 15% affordable as possible.
So this is additional density on top of the other avenues?
And then you,
Or like, so they can increase their density through
Sustainable bonus.
sustainable bonus or through transfer development
Or through the plan development.
or plan development. Is this just an alternate? Because I don't know why anyone would choose this if they have the other.
the only way they can get those incentives for the plan development, TDRs or bonus is to de-restrict part of those additional.
So we're talking about a change in the way.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, maybe. And then if you get to that number, whatever it is, let's say for instance, the Bohemian was at 200 units an acre as it sits now, with the TDRs and sustainable bonus, 200 units an acre. Through this, 30 units an acre, 15% of it, would have to be deed restricted. They could also ask for another 15% on top of the 200, which is another 30 units an acre, but all of those would have to be deed restricted.
So that was the tier 1 and tier 2
Yes.
that was making my head
Okay.
do funny things.
So of 200 units, only 30 would have to be affordable.
Out of the, well, it's 200 units, but it's 100 units an acre. So it's 15 units, so it would be 30. That will be the requirement.
30,
No less than 30.
less than 30.
No,
No less.
No, right, no less, but I mean, who's gonna add? I mean, for a 200, it seems like a small percentage.
But we do have, like, we have to make the developer whole, right? We can't add requirements on the developer that's gonna hurt them more than like if they just develop by right.
Right. And the way about the extraction, that's an interesting way to put it. Yes.
Sorry.
And there was also the part, and I don't know if that applies to this or not. But what we talked about earlier, that if you move from the by right to some of these other things, but the cost of doing so is so high, then people won't do it.
Right. Because keep in mind that as you increase density, oftentimes the construction cost of a building goes up. right now, the least expensive building is tunnel form, 3-story walk-ups that have no interior common area space, which is what we've got at Lake Worth, Village of Lake Worth, Village of Lake Osborne. Two other
All the
ones.
little findos in town, just like 8 units.
But once you go to 4 stories, you have to have an elevator. And it's expensive to do elevators that don't have at least some shared common area, lobby, or some air conditioning space. We don't allow any high rises in the city. It's actually put that's usable space above 75 feet. There is a potential to get to a high rise building less than 95 where the TDR, the transfer or development location is. And that would be at the 9th floor. The likelihood of that happening is not going to happen because you have to add so many more floors to bring the cost per square foot down by triggering that high-rise construction. It's areas of refuge and other common area elements that we put in place. And so it doesn't make sense. I don't think it makes economic sense in Lake Worth Beach to ever have a building taller than 8 stories. Because you do get into the requirements of high-rise, which add exponentially to the cost of construction. So that's where we are with that. So how this is set up is income based on the type of unit. And we'll call each unit a household. So for a studio, the math, and actually I want to give some credit to Herman Robinson's wife, Laura Robinson. She sat with me twice and gave me a huge amount of criticism, a lot of feedback, and coordinated a meeting with some other folks in affordable housing. It really helped fine tune this and give us some options that can help us ensure a path for some of the units being perpetually affordable. And I'll explain that in a minute. So we have households that are governed by a percentage of the median household income that's relative to the county. The county, I think, is like 78,000 right now for family of 4. So this will take on that number, and so that we don't have to amend this ordinance a lot. That
80,200.
okay, so the percentage in the household is floating with that number. And what I wanted to do is create a program where a person making a living wage of $15 an hour could live on their own in a studio. And this does that by this having this income restriction.
What's the hour? I'm sorry.
$15 an hour. Yeah. And they're not spending more than 35% of their gross income for their housing.
And the $80,000 is the Palm Beach County mean income?
Ours is like 38,000, 39 now. So this, and it floats based on the unit type, whether it's a studio.
Which would we use, ours or the
We
county?
use the county. The county is what runs the other programs that this works in with. If we went with the cities, we wouldn't have any housing bill.
Yeah.
And you said that number was what, Joan, for median household?
80,200.
And ours is about half
38,
that.
half that.
That's a huge jump because last year was 66.
Half that. Yeah, really.
So this is, built around the different housing, and then there's an additional, if you're going to do a single family home ownership option, the household income can go up a little bit. There's also a payment program, and it works 2 different ways. Let's say the developer does not want to incorporate the affordable housing in their project. They can pay themselves out of it, which is an option, and you don't have to take this into consideration. And based on the units, that we would have to come up with a requirement of the mix of the units, but they would pay out a similar percentage, $40,000 if they didn't build a studio unit, $60,000 for a 1-bedroom, and up the scale through based on the household income. In reverse, if the city wanted to buy more units and have them deed restricted, you could pay that commensurate amount back to the developer. And I'm proposing that it be part of the sustainable bonus waiver. So that instead of the check coming to the city of the half of the sustainable bonus value, you could say, oh, we will take that half, whatever that number is, it's $100,000, $200,000, and invest in it in keeping more units than will be required based on these values as restricted as affordable.
So of their density.
But it wouldn't help, their density wouldn't increase, but their numbers.
The number of units would increase.
I'm also, and I talked to the county about this, and they're working on this, and I'm gonna try to steal it or borrow it from them. Is a first right of refusal in the sense that when the deed restriction is scheduled to come off, let's say in 20, 25 years, the city would have the first right to say, developer, we're agreeing to pay you this amount again to then extend that affordability for another 25 years. And I want it written, and this is where Elizabeth comes in to help, they can't say no.
Why can't it be why can't it be forever? The affordability.
They just keep coming back to us every 25 years.
Yes, because the cost of maintenance, repair, operations is going to change. And there is no way for a developer to run up a formula that would say this unit has to be perpetually at a certain price and figure out what it's going to cost them. So this way, we have it for 20, 25 years, and then we pay, we could pay, and then there will be an affordable housing trust fund that will develop out of this, where we could then again ask them to dedicate those units and keep them in increments of 25 years, possibly affordable in perpetuity.
Or we pay them the $40,000. And,
First year.
right,
And
but also at the same time, we don't know in 25 years what the value, whether $40,000 would be a good deal or a bad deal for the city.
This actually floats with the median household income, so it might go up.
Okay.
And we can refuse. We
We could say we don't want to.
can say we don't want to do
And
it.
they can go float with the market.
Yeah.
But I want the right to choose whether it stays in perpetuity
Right.
up to
It
years.
should be up to us.
That's great if you can manage that.
Yeah.
I think we legally can.
And then,
Quick, do it before we can't.
sure.
Tallahassee gets involved.
The county has something that, I mentioned it at our meeting where Carmen was there, and Patrick Rutgers and Jonathan Brown's eyes lit up a little bit, that they have something that working on that's similar to that. So it's not written in here. I don't really know how to write the language yet until I get that information from them. So it's a pretty simple program. It does allow you to incorporate other affordable housing programs, but whichever one has the most restricted requirements, either in terms of the covenant, the income requirements, whatever else, would govern the units. We're not going to mix and match and, hey, part of it's affordable housing program like for Beach, part of it's low income housing credits, part of it's the county. And the county exchange program, if I'm honest, and they don't really like mixing with other programs. So theirs is a little more restricted than ours. Because I'm hoping to get units out of this. And unfortunately, the county hasn't been that successful in getting units created. So also the funding for the incentive, if we choose to help buy down some units, could come from either the Senate bonus incentive trust account or the transfer development rights account, which we spoke about an hour ago or so. The restrictions are pretty self-explanatory. I proposed 20 years here. You can look at that and see whether we could push it to 25. There's a restricted covenant. And there's also a component in here that if you provide an annual report and one of those affordable units falls out of being affordable, they pay a penalty of $15 per square foot for the unit that wasn't affordable. So if it's an 800 square foot, 2-bedroom unit that wasn't affordable that year, they're going to pay us $15 times 800 for that year. And they'll pay it every year it's not affordable.
Well, that's great for rental, but what do we do? Let's just be hypothetical and say, okay, fast forward 15 years from now, and that person who was renting out those apartments now wants to sell them. And we find out that they sold them at market rate, not affordable home ownership. What recourse?
Isn't the deed restriction
The deed restriction, they pay a penalty. There's a deed restriction that it must remain affordable for that whole period.
No, but
And it's recorded, so if it wasn't closing, that would be, the title company would say, hey, wait, this is a deed restriction, you can't violate it.
And if they wanted to pay, and this is what, Elizabeth's gonna help me with, let's say that that's kind of like this. If they did that, remember that number we used per unit? They would pay the then current percentage of the median household income based on the unit type as a penalty.
to the city of Lake Worth Beach.
Yes.
And the reason I'm bringing this up is because part of the first NSP phase, there are some bad players who turned around and refinanced their house, and then they turned around and started renting those homes. And they weren't supposed to rent them. Those are supposed to be owner lived in only. So there was no, even when they filed for a rental license here in the city of Lake Worth Beach, there wasn't, it wasn't flagged, it wasn't caught until neighbors complained and reported it because they were NSP homeowners.
Sure.
And Joan had to then get an attorney involved and contact the county. And I just want to make sure that whatever this is all great, but we need to make sure that there's recourse and that there's.
Could we flag the
Well,
fund?
there's an annual report that's due for this, for every year that it's in the program. So if it's
When you say it, mean whatever property it is.
whatever property is that falls into this, let's say that it's restricted covenant for 20 years, you're gonna get an annual report every year for 20 years. It spells out which units were affordable and what rents were charged and all this. It's gonna put an onus on staff, but I think it's worth it. And I think we could do it with one staff person. I mean, we do it with our current staff for a period of time. And then if our program is really successful, we've got dozens of projects participating, we'll probably have to have a person that would monitor that. And if somebody fell out and let's say it did go to a sale option, then, and those were not sold at affordable rates, they gotta pay.
Yeah, I would like to see some kind of cross-reference be
Well,
put
I
in
was just gonna
place.
say, it's one thing for the property owner to say, yes, I did that, but I wonder for what backup we're asking for. You know, it's like a financial affidavit, you put a number down. Or what-
Yeah, and how do you claim it's your relative living there, but yet you've had an ad out showing that you rented this place out? I mean, it's catchy.
Enforcement's always a problem.
yeah, there's bad players, right? But I just want to make sure whatever we're doing is if we can put like a cross-reference somehow, again, going back to software and IT, to flag these homes or these addresses or however we need to do it to safeguard ourselves.
You could do that if they come in for rental license, it's not gonna happen. And one question, can they, with these affordable housing programs, the incentive, instead of, can they do, we'll pay for some and we'll incorporate, so they can mix and match with this, they could. Yes, okay.
It's gonna be as flexible as it can be based on the project needs and performer needs of the developer, to be driven by them. Because if you want extra units, you're gonna have to do some affordability. And I hope that it's not us as the city having to develop the units, but it could be. I mean,
Yeah.
if people are paying out of the program and putting money in trust fund, which is the county's been getting trust fund money for a long time, then we could spin off our own housing program, or if Joan's still in business, we say, Joan, here's $500,000, go create some affordable housing someplace.
Yeah.
Or do
I know the county's been advertising heavily for home ownership and for rehabs and money to.
and this works for both home ownership and
Rental.
rental.
Mr. Dufoy, I see your light is on.
This is just understanding for me and maybe for the other communities. Often we do these kind of things with the developer, and then it's my understanding that the developer doesn't necessarily stick around. They may sell the building either relatively quickly or after they get tired of it after 5 years or whatever. Does all this stuff then go to the next owner?
It's deed restricted, there's covenants on the property.
Okay.
Covenants over the land.
All right, so that's good. And I guess the other part of that is sort of what we talked about. Is this enforceable? Is there some mechanism that, because like you mentioned with some of the things earlier, our big stick is we're not giving you the CO until you do these things. These people would presumably long since have the CO.
And it's reporting, and I've talked to Susan Cabrera very informally and Joan as well, is that there are nonprofit entities who are working to ensure that affordable housing stays around. So they would likely be open to helping us monitor it. We may have to pay something for that. But I don't think it's going to be an amount that's so exorbitant that it's not worth Lake Worth Beach and investing in that assistance in maintaining the covenants or adhered to by whichever owner I own it.
Okay.
For example, they could track, I mean, if the electric bill name changes, that's one indication, or if they apply for rental license, which would be another way to do it.
Yeah, and you mentioned let's electrify, digitalize some of that stuff.
Something, yes.
And I totally agree that makes all the sense in the world.
And I mean, I
We
love the
have
fact
two
that,
ways with
I love that we're
that.
talking about rentals, but I mean, I'm hoping that we're all on the same page of creating new home ownership, creating generational wealth with giving people the
If it's possible,
opportunity
yeah, definitely.
to buy homes.
One bite at a time, yeah.
This
And
this
is
allows for both types of
Yeah.
ownership or rental.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's more, if you're doing it for home ownership, there's a greater subsidy than non-ownership, but it's incorporated in here as well.
Okay.
That's it on this.
Madam Mayor?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, I had a
Oh,
quick
sorry.
question. For the incentives that are based on like the number of rooms, is there a measure that we can take that also looks at, I'm gonna throw out the word control, or like, that considers how many people are gonna be in these number of rooms?
We have a minimum housing code and also the building code stipulate how many people can be in a particular residence. The first piece is that no more than 300 individuals can live in a unit or a dwelling unit. Then based on the bedroom size and the number of bedrooms will dictate how many people could be in a unit. That's also the minimum housing for the building code. So yes, that's why I started off with what does it take for a single person that wants to live alone? What can we do for them who's doing a living wage? That's where the studio came from.
Right.
And so on a one bedroom unit, for the most part, only 2 people can live there. 2 bedroom, it could be anywhere from 2 to as many as 4, possibly. Depending on the room size. And we do get into some weird oddities when we have a young couple has a baby. That's always causes a twist.
But again, the hard part is enforcing that when you have a 2-bedroom house and you know that 7 guys are living in there and because if we can't gain access lawfully, we can't prove it.
And one of the things, and when I was years ago, we would go at, the people were talking about overcrowding, so we would go at night and kind of check. And yeah, there are, but I mean, I think a lot of that was economics.
Still is.
Somebody's paying, it's a 3-bedroom house and the rent is $2,500 and you're working in the fields, you need 7 people to do it.
It's still the economics of our city.
Question about, from the resident side, if you were lucky enough to get placed into one of these 3-bedroom houses and you qualified for it and you went through and the paperwork and you were chosen, you're there. Would you want to jeopardize that by cramming your unit full of 10 people? Because I'm sure that in order to participate in this program, there's requirements from the renter side.
There is, and this is what.
So there's more, I would think there's more enforcement if you're participating in a subsidized program than if you're just.
Well, that's where Laurel was very helpful. She brought up the fact that, okay, so there's a single person who has the household income that qualifies and for the 3-bedroom unit. Do they get it and they can rent it out to somebody else? No, the 3-bedroom unit is dedicated for a family of 4. And so that part is a little bit tricky to how to write it in the ordinance, but she was very helpful and gave some suggestions that, okay, if you're a single person, you can do either the studio or the 1-bedroom, your household income can't be beyond a certain amount. And it's really the household income has to stay at a certain, and that includes everybody who's living in the household, even if you're possibly unrelated. There is going to be an enforcement challenge, but we have that with just about everything.
But I mean, with the home ownership, once you prove and you get the mortgage,
Yeah.
as long as you're making the mortgage payment, you get to keep the house. Like with Habitat, they don't charge an interest rate. So it's 0% to Habitat for Humanity,
Really?
but you get approved and you make the payments. And if you don't, you lose your home.
Well, it's any mortgage.
But that's what I'm saying. So, but they verified the income they've gone through, whereas rentals, they could have had their income verified in 6 months from now. They lose their job. How do we know that?
Homeowner can lose their job.
Yeah.
Again, but I'm saying it's different because it's a mortgage with the rental, like that's how do you know when their income is fluctuated to when they need to bring in 2 roommates to offset the job they just lost,
We won't know until the year's up.
until it's time for them to redo unless you request documents every 6 months.
The bigger
No, you
issue
should do it
here
annually.
is that people income throws them out of the affordability restriction.
Yeah, that's.
I think for how many
That's more of a problem than someone losing their job and making less money and then having to roommates in, historically.
And I'm gonna venture wildly, speculate that if people that we're talking about who are overcrowding the house because they can't afford to live otherwise. I mean, unless some of them get a really big raise or something happens in their life, they're not gonna raise up to, I mean, this is, I mean, essentially, we're trying to help people get good essentially subsistence housing at this point. I mean, quality, but.
Well, yeah, because at 45% of 80,200 for the median household income, that means you're making 36,000 as an independent person. 2 people would be $52,000.
It's based on the unit. The household income includes as many people that are in there has to be within that.
No, I'm looking at the 1 bedroom.
Too high.
So the 1 bedroom, you have 65%. Well, 65% of 80,200 is $52,130
Right.
for 2 people to make, or 1 person who wants a 1-bedroom unit, right?
Or it could be 2 people that one of them works and one of them is the wife who's sitting at home.
But it's the combined income. So for a 2-bedroom, you can't make more than $68,000 on paper.
Right.
I sense,
No, because you said that Mr. Waters had just stated that it's keeping people within that bracket. I don't know many people who in today's society and on a one bedroom at $52,000, if you have one person working and a stay-at-home wife or somebody in college, we see what's happening with the workforce right now. For people to make above $12 an hour without a high school diploma
It's tough.
is extremely tough. So if it's affordable housing we're really going after, I just don't see how that, again, it's that, especially for our community, that 80,000 is what's throwing it off because it's the county number. We know what our residents make. What's that?
Family of four.
80,000,
Yes.
but it still starts out, really, I think I get your point. I mean, we're talking about the people that we're trying to help. Or
Fall into me like way.
Do we have to use the 80,000 or can we use Lake Worth's median income?
You can use whatever you want, it's just, you're gonna have to
Just keep in mind
recalculate.
that, okay.
Okay, right, yeah.
Let's do it. I've done this with Stokes in it. A developer to bring a square foot to market, you've got to consider the carrying cost and from the time the person tries to put a contract on the land till they can actually get it operating. The hard cost of construction, repair and maintenance, long-term repair and maintenance, replacement of things, the operation of the building, electric, all of that. A very simple number is that if it costs $200 total to get that square foot open for someone to use, the developer is going to need $30 in revenue at a minimum, which is 15% of that $200 for each square foot.
From a subsidy.
For a year. No, that's for the year. So 1,000 square foot unit at its cost needs to generate $30,000 of it revenue
In a year.
a year. A 400 square foot unit needs to generate $12,000 a year, or a minimum $1,000 a month. The lower you put the income threshold, the more subsidy you have to provide. Otherwise, the developer can't make it work.
No, I hear you. I hear you. I'm just thinking of our community and why we have 7 people living in a 2 and 3 bedroom apartment or house.
So if developers are, and this does apply to some nonprofits and some lower income housing developers, if they want to use more restricted programs than what this is, they can do that. Like the Banning Court, they have rental rates between like 35% of median income, 40s, I think even low as 25% maybe. But the program has specified how many percent of the total number of units fall within those various categories. So if a lower income developer wants to do that, which is more restricted than what this is, we welcome it.
Because they might get additional funding, federal funding or other programs to help offset those costs, more than what we can provide. through our-
Adopted family would be a good example. It would seem like of that stage, their demographic is quite low.
Yes, I had a question about affordable housing, especially affordable home ownership. If there's a way for us to try to ensure that it truly is going to the people who've chosen to live here and invest their lives here for years or something, or is there any way to give preference, like local preference, to people who already live in Lake Worth, or can somebody from, West Palm Beach come in and take up these units? I don't see us getting a ton of units. Like, we'll see what projects come through, how many developers want to participate.
Do we have a
Don't
preference?
shaking her head. Yes, you want to.
Yeah, for NSP, we normally work with Adopted Family Habitat, Neighborhood Renaissance, and the CLT, and we're working with them again. And we have preferences, and one of them is local. They either live here locally or do they work here?
Yeah, because people are doing this to try and help our residents.
That's right. Cheap housing for outsiders. Okay,
I'll have to think about how we can incorporate the LDRS, but I'm sure.
Elizabeth will find out.
Your plate keeps getting bigger.
Bill's got a big bucket charger. Not even close to having it full yet.
Okay,
Is there-
Cool.
are there
any questions? Any other questions? We have kind of a handle on this.
Nope,
So I'm gonna
okay.
continue
And again, I'm
to-
gonna say, I mean, any other questions that we have for William that we should, ask of service. There's a lot going on here. But that, yeah, that is high, you're right.
I'm excited about this next, I mean, I'm excited about all of this.
Yeah.
We've been wanting to do this for a long time.
We've been talking
And with-
about doing it.
But with respect to having a new CM and knowing that there was a new elected coming, we kind of put everything on pause, but we've all been waiting to like get rolling.
Right, yeah.
So I'm
We're really
excited.
rolling for the next couple of months.
I'm just excited to have this conversation to really be able to start moving it forward.
Good too.
Two questions on the affordable one before we leave it and go on to the next one. I'm interested in too. One is, have you had the opportunity, William, or the group of people that have been thinking about it, to run it by some developers and yeah, this flies, or, oh, is someone to work, or, because it obviously, we're enthusiastic about it, but we want to make sure that this has legs.
It will fly, and I've actually asked her.
It's got wings.
What we have to be open to is buildings that may be a little more tall than we're comfortable and a little more dense than we're comfortable in order to make the numbers work. And that's kind of the conclusion that Ms. Baker got at our meeting, and she says we may have to accept buildings that are taller than what we normally would
more
want,
realistic.
or more dense
Mhm.
in order to meet this crushing need for affordable housing. I think we're like short 7,000 units or something a year or something.
So that's for, obviously that's for rentals, but if we're looking at affordable homes, then we don't have to, we're not gonna build a home that's 3 stories high. We're gonna build affordable homes that are affordable,
No,
maintainable.
but there are people,
condos.
there's pressure that we not continue to allow lots of record that are a single parcel to be split back into the 25-foot lots to build houses that can be affordable. The more land you associate with a house, based on today's market, the
Right.
more expensive it gets. And so Lake Works is uniquely situated in that we have the 25-foot lots that are platted here and are lots of record, but you can build a lot of cottages, and they're nice homes. And we've seen some really good examples in the historic districts. We need to figure out how to get a little better quality of architecture from the ones that are being built west of Dixie, but that's what I'm struggling with. But and then also, as you mentioned, condominiums.
Can we do affordable home ownership with condos?
Yeah, sure.
And making sure that they're attainable, including the HOA and all the stuff that comes with condo fees
And
and.
the bigger the condo project, the smaller the HOA.
As long as the common area elements don't get like way
Crazy, yeah.
so.
What about co-ops? Can we do something like a co-op instead of a,
Well, co-ops have odd regulations when it
They
comes
do.
to mortgages, and you have to buy shares.
Yeah,
It's
but they own the land, right, is the concept
the,
versus,
shares in the overall project.
okay.
and yeah,
Sometimes
it's,
you just own to-
By the way, you all just looked at me. I'm gonna go with nobody likes that word co-op.
I love it.
Because I'm like, you own a piece of the land. That's why I was like, if you can't own all the land, at least you own
but you own, I mean, with a condo, you own
your
part
walls.
of, well, but you own the building as well. I mean, you all together own the building. You own the condo association owns the land.
The land use
I've dealt with
regulations in
co-ops in
Florida,
there.
Property rights make co-ops difficult here.
There's a couple on A1A, they're not happy with their situation.
Yeah.
So we have one on C Street in Royal Point, Sienna, that's, I think, got 12 units in it. Pretty successful.
The last topic is micro units, which is. Okay, sorry. I can't see that.
You kind of
And I-
semi-answered it with the last question, but when it comes to rentals, I mean, we're not discouraging like mixed use buildings as well, right? Because they can offset, they can offset what they're not making in loads of units with maybe commercials.
Well, that, we made a decision with the comp plan in 2012 that our percentage of use in most of our mixed use districts would be our goal would be 75% of the building area would be residential, 25% would be commercial, office, retail, personal services. It was a reverse before that. And as we have seen development, like the unit that's waiting list for residential, they're having a tough time.
They're not getting any.
And they're actually, I think, they're renting it for free or practically free. Eventually, those will make up some difference as we get more people in. And the greater densities in the city are in mixed use districts. And some of the planned developments require a mixed use component, but they must incorporate residential. The largest incentive, the 50% one, you better include residential and 2 other use types,
Office and retail.
or it could be personal services.
The mid, I want to say the mid, I had heard some chatter about the mid parking and I drove it because I think it's a great project. I toured it on people that live there love it. But when you go behind those, where the businesses would be, there really isn't any, I mean, I don't know what happened because I thought that was all going to be public parking and it is not.
No, it's
I
close.
think they're having a problem. I think they have an issue with their parking. I think we might want to take a look at it.
And if you're on Dixie Highway and you pass it, like.
Oh, you can, but that's.
You gotta-
Highway, but, you can't park on Dixie Highway, but I mean, I drove by and I was like, if I want to come to a store that was in that place, there really wasn't any place to park.
Well, you can park on 16th or 17th on the street and walk over. And the project was designed that whenever we try to do our road diet, they built a secondary sidewalk. So it's designed so you can do parallel parking along Dixie. When and if the Dixie Highway.
Take your life into your hands.
Well, they have parallel parking. I mean, it works in West Palm, so it should go to work here. I mean, maybe people don't drive as well in Lake Worth Beach as West Palm. I don't know, but there's parallel parking on Dixie and Dixie.
I have to say though, I use the Cube Smart next to the Min, and the parallel spots on that side street are almost always filled with
Yeah.
residents because it's much easier,
Right.
especially the ones that live along that street. It's much easier for them just to shoot out the back door and onto that street than it is to go through their gate. And
Plus, there's no guest parking at the mid.
Right.
Guest
Right, the
is
parking is
on
a
the
challenge with the men.
Yeah, so, and that brings me to I was mentioning again, and if Commissioner Robinson was still here, he's screaming.
Mobility.
Can we do it in unison?
Because all of the talk that we're talking about, okay, if we require more than 15%, we price ourselves out of what a developer can afford. Parking is a huge driver in increasing cost for developers because either you're using surface parking, you like dedicate a huge chunk of your land to that, or you're building a very expensive parking garage. And so we have to figure out, William said, are we going to be comfortable with a little bit more in density? And I am a NIMBY at heart, but like, I know it's not what is best for the city. But I feel like we have to have a plan for how we're going to move people around the city and how people are going to get around as we see more residents move in here. And I don't think we can separate the two. I don't think that we can just keep building more and more and more and figure it out, later as we all see congestion and everyone gets frustrated. I know that's a lot of the complaints when people see even like a new house go up in their neighborhood. Oh, that's going to take side parking away from us. And it's
Well,
like,
we have, do we
that's a
still,
vacant lot and
No,
no
we
one
talked, we talked about making sure they had 2 parking spots.
is still
On the-
required to have 2 off-street parking on a single family
Mhm.
from the rear?
But one of your on-site parking can be the parking space in front of your house on the street.
Which is public parking and you can't guarantee it.
You can't guarantee it.
And people are freaking out because they want parking stickers in their neighborhoods because of all the parking that's going on.
It's a huge issue, and I think the more we can get out ahead of it, it will help us with our goals of.
When you say that though, I've never, every time Herman said that, I said, well, I wonder what he means by that. Do you mean like trolleys and all
We have
public?
trolleys, it actually came up in the education task force that the students are having a hard time. They're asking, can we have some little bus or something that can help get the students to aftercare programs, after school programs, like just ways of getting people, trolleys, buses. I mean, I'd love a light rail system someday, like just any pedicabs. I mean, like, there's like a whole array of like, what is a gondola from? We have to look at what's possible, what we can do, what makes sense for our city, but I want to know that we have a plan in place, and knowing that also for some of the people that are in this range of, less affluent, maybe if we had easier ways for them to get to where they need to go, they don't need to invest half their salary in a car that breaks down every other month. And they have to have ways.
Alternate ways.
They have to have alternate ways. So like, I just don't think we can separate the two.
That conversation is going to emerge out of the realization that where we can provide the best bang for the buck in terms of affordable or workforce housing is in the eastern part of the county, where the jobs are, where services are. And as we become more successful with our housing, the county is definitely going to have to take the lead on, okay, as a collective group or whole, how are we going to do a better job of mobility of people throughout the county? Because we can't, most of our streets east of 95 can't get bigger. And the cost of a car has gotten insane in Florida. Just the insurance is ridiculous. And so I think it's the next conversation that's going to come once we figure out the challenge of how to get the housing reconstructed. The next one will be how to get these people around. Because I don't think the car is going to become less expensive.
Yeah.
And and there'll be an indefinite need, because I think we will be a bedroom community to a great degree of other employment bases like downtown West Palm, the western area of Boca, some areas of Boynton Beach. We will have residents who want to live here for quality of life, but they're actually working somewhere else. Or possibly the stay at home or work from home thing has been evolved more too. And you may only go to the office 2 days a week versus 5 days a week. That will help you. Transportation issues some.
But and I agree with that, and the county should help some, but I think the more that we can be looking for, the better. And something that you mentioned in my mind is critical is, let's say you work in the office 2 days a week and the office is in West Boca. Well, there's pretty much no way to get there other than driving. And even though you only drive 2 weeks a week, you have to take that jump of buying the car. Now, maybe you could buy only one car for a family instead of two, but some way of us to be thinking about how can you realistically get people around and avoid the whole car expense.
There's cars on demand.
I was just gonna say, there's rental
That-
cars like the
They're
bicycles now.
Yeah, zip cars and
Yeah.
lots of.
But private rented room. Because my question is, we
Are partially heavily subsidized, but if you
It's a
start
mix.
looking out what it costs to maintain a car and run it, and you're only using it. It
It's
starts
huge.
making no sense to keep the car. You just get
Yeah.
an Uber, a Lyft, or a mobility option.
Yep.
Part of our problem is that we're so spread out in density of not activities, but residential, office, retail being close by is working against us, because like you said, some people have to drive 40 minutes in their own county to go to work, which to me makes.
Some people
no
drive from
sense.
Port St. Lucie. I mean, our employees go way far.
Waxahachie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You. Commissioner Diaz.
This is a good, I think there's a good opportunity to bring something up that I know is gonna maybe bring some visible cringe, because it is really innovative and kind of a future thing. And that's the removal of mandatory minimum parking, because like Commissioner Stokes mentions, this isn't something that we separate and deal with it later. And I think as we have an opportunity here with this affordable housing program, if we are preferencing, locals and people who work within the city, and I'm pretty close to this category, people, the public transit, mobility, and not having a car. I mean, we have the framework for that. We should be planning for that. And that's maybe something to consider, especially, with these sort of development projects that we're considering, because the reality is, cars are never going to be completely done away with, I don't think. But the balance certainly is shifting back towards public transit. And if we can do things like that, we can deploy, immediately or within the year, things like, the circuit or shuttle or Molly's trolleys, whatever you want to call it, to help slowly improve that mobility, that public transit. I mean, I think you're going to see developers take notice and, focus more on density and that sort of thing, and not give away so much of the project to parking.
You'll be surprised. We have one of the lower parking requirements of most development, but we've had projects struggle with the fact that their financing is insisting on them having more parking than they would like to have. And I'm like, I never thought I'd hear that before, but yeah, the banks are in their own little world, and the financial institutions that, funds them. So we are incrementally getting there, but finance people have got to catch up
Mm.
with.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna take a lot of convincing to say we should get rid of the parking minimum. I'm gonna tell you right now, people drive, I drive. I read Strong Towns, I subscribe to Strong Towns, I get it, but the one that I'll call you good, but one of the examples Burlington, Vermont has a beautiful downtown. They closed off the whole street. It's cobblestones, it's little people selling silver earrings and playing the guitar. It's fabulous. And right on the other side is a 4-story garage, because how do people get there? We're not living in New York City, where you can hop on terrible subway and hope that it comes. We don't have that kind of, like William said, we're so spread out. I just, for certain things. What?
Lake Worth is
No, not Lake Worth, I'm just saying in general.
Palm Beach County is,
Yeah,
but
but-
we're not.
It's okay, I
But we
understood.
don't have the employment opportunities
Right,
here.
we're a
Many
bedroom.
of our
Not yet.
residents live here
And shopping.
and work somewhere else. They like the quality of life, and it's a little town village kind of atmosphere, and so they're working downtown West Palm or other places. We will get some employment, but I don't think we'll ever have as many employment opportunities as you would necessarily want. Because the employment center will be downtown West Palm.
Yeah, I mean, right now on the dais, you've
But
got
those are.
probably reach the
Yeah.
few people that live and
Tyrell
work
that gets you.
downtown. Yeah, I mean,
And I think what Commissioner Diaz said is, none of us envisioned cars totally going away. But the balance, I remember reading this years ago, and it was some fairly conservative American Heritage. It was an outfit that did economic research, fairly conservative. And they pointed out that the household expense of cars was just phenomenally high. And so if we can find ways to help people avoid that, or at least per household, maybe one car instead of 2 cars or things like that, it helps people economically and it makes us more targeted. And the thing that struck me about wandering around the mid, and I'm curious to you, is there's almost no green space. It's just like.
it's a little bare.
It's very spare. So if you are thinking of, I don't know that anybody raises families in there, but if you want to take your kids out and they want to, there's nothing. And Dixie Highway is no help either, and there's not.
Well, there's a pool and all that.
What's that?
There's a pool in a shaded area and there's a playground.
That's not green space, but
What's not?
at least hopefully the pool's not green space.
There's a play yard thing.
Yeah,
There's a little bit, but it's very, very minimal. And if one could shift the balance to a bit less parking and a bit more green, I think that would be.
Well, that's the challenge that we have, is that, well, here's what do you prefer? You have the same 230 units. We have essentially 8 buildings at the mid at 3 stories. What if you have 4 buildings, the same footprint, but they're all 6 stories and all the rest of the green space?
Mhm.
Which would you prefer?
That was Le Corbusier's idea a long time ago was.
Well, yeah, except we're getting sued because of the Deco Green.
Echo Green.
This is up one
And
extra
that
thing.
has a dramatically more green space than the mid,
Yeah.
but. So there is a give and take, we gotta find a happy medium, you can't be everything to everybody.
And that's why I'm talking about doing the historic on the west side of town, because then, if we're not sacrificing cottages, and there are some high buildings on the outskirts of town, not downtown, but we can't have it all. Commissioner Mulligan.
You guys are scaring me when you're talking about cars going away. That is how I make a living.
That's how I get around.
And trust me, cars are not going away and people are still buying big cars at $5 and $4 a gallon. It's blowing my mind. You're new to the dais, and I will tell you that one thing you're going to learn is that when we do have projects before us, all of the neighbors send us emails in regards to parking, 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 parking. So we can, in my opinion, never get away from having a minimum parking requirement, because we will have this entire room in the hallway packed. Because people want to know that we're protecting. Instead of saying, get rid of the parking requirement, we really just have to look at parking permits for residents. And we need to look at getting rid of all these construction trucks and big cargo vans that are taking up the parking that is on the street.
Landscape truck.
I've got, literally, there's probably, and I shared this with Ms. Davis last week, on one corner in Royal Point, Sienna, there are 6 vans parked every single night. You take 6 extra long cargo vans, those equate to 9 regular cars.
Do they live there?
They own the home and they run their business out of the home, so all those trucks. We need to take, again, go back to the teeth, and we already have rules on the books, we're just not enforcing them. We don't need to take a step back, we need to go forward and start enforcing this. And saying, okay, this is a rule, you're taking up 9 parking spaces that now you live there and you live there, and you can't even park your 1 car.
So right now, query, what would the violation at this point be?
There's no overnight parking of commercial vehicles on our streets. And we just need to enforce it, because it's not fair to those homeowners or those people who are renting.
So there is a rule that's.
We have that, but we're not enforcing it. You know, you've got flat, no, it doesn't.
Then you got, but then what about, we can just go deep into this rabbit hole. What about the guy that has his own air conditioning service and he parks in front of his house?
You need to do what everybody else does. You need to hire a place, or you need to park it at CubeSmart, or you need to park it where it's supposed to be. I've got a client who owns a demolition company, and he lives in a gated community in Boca. It's not really gated, but they have a gate to get into the neighborhood. And he can't have his trucks there. So he pays Macaroni Grill, and he parks his trucks behind Macaroni Grill every single night.
How does he get from Macaroni Grill to home?
He has a van, a little tiny,
I'm saying this guy
he has
doesn't have that.
he has an old minivan that he drives. It's like 300
But so now you're saying the guy has to have 2 vehicles.
But my bottom line is we have these rules, and we have to enforce them, because this has been a city that has been letting people just slide past.
But if we got a parking permit program, he could get a parking permit for his 1 vehicle.
For 1 vehicle,
Right, which,
but not,
for him,
not a fleet of.
no, I understand that, but I mean, if I'm the guy that does air conditioning, and it's also the car that I get to go around, and there was a parking sticker, I could put it on that, even if it's a commercial vehicle, that would.
Then we would have to change our rules, because our rules say,
Right, again,
our rules say that there's no overnight parking for commercial vehicles.
yeah, but I think there's so many small businesses in this town that.
That's how you define it. What is a commercial vehicle?
And that's what I was going to mention, is that
Right.
we could redefine or more, provide a better illustrative definition of the commercial vehicle, because it's a plumbing business that's in Grandview Heights near my house, and they have a whole variety of sizes of little vans.
Right.
And some of them are no bigger than my car.
Transit.
They're taller, but
Yeah.
and other ones are like 10-wheel trucks. Well, depending if you're gonna have your business and work from home and you are in a residential neighborhood, here is the maximum commercial type vehicle you can have as your thing.
Primary vehicle.
You can't have 10, but maybe you can have 4.
I mean, they're parking
Or whatever the
they're
number is.
parking landscaping.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Trailers on the corner, and we have a parking.
There's a
problem.
couple semis that are continually parked
So
out.
we just need to take what we have and really enforce it, and maybe fine tune it to say,
Let's fine tune
Yeah,
it.
let's.
yeah, to, okay,
I talked to a resident in your district once, knocking on doors, and she said, I don't mind if my neighbor has 1.
Mhm.
It's the fact that they have 4.
right, and
They're
then,
parking in front of their house,
Right.
and that's their 1. I don't care, but.
And it's a
they're
safety-
lining the street.
it's a safety feature, because when you're sitting at the stop sign, you can't see around those vans to cross the
Yeah.
street, and then you get hit by somebody because they couldn't see you.
I see Commissioner Diaz.
Yeah.
Diaz on the Diaz on the Diaz.
Yeah, so, you know, I just want to be clear, like removal of minimum parking, it's not, don't equate it with the loss of parking availability. It's because, you know, we're talking about generally specific districts, right? Like housing that's available along US 1, along Dixie Highway, you know, they probably won't need as much parking. And believe me, I get those comments and emails all the time as well. But usually when they're directed at me, the comment is because there's no other option available right now. And along the transit corridors like US 1 or, you know, or there is opportunity there to improve on the transit, and especially also Lake and Lucerne. There's opportunity to improve transit between the train station, Palm Beach State College, and our beach. And that's where, you know, that would come into play. And then in those areas where there's parallel spots, you know, we should explore, we do need to be creative. We do need to adjust for parking, and we can be creative in certain areas through like road dividing, through back in angled parking. You're going to get more cars per curb frontage than parallel. And people made a comment earlier about people not being able to parallel park. It's a lot easier. It's a lot safer to back in at an angle, and where space
Back in?
back in, like kind of like on J Street in downtown.
Just pull in.
They're facing, you would back in the park, you're facing the other direction, so everyone has to back into their spot. And then when they leave, they drive forward, and it's a proven heading concept.
Stop for just a second.
It's a thing, it is.
I'm not crazy, but he's in J Street, because J Street is angled parking.
Right,
Okay, so this would be you pull in and you pull out of the same, like the parking would be in the middle of the block?
no, you just reverse the angle.
People backing into parking space?
It's proven to be safer, but
I only back in. I don't pull forward in anywhere.
Yeah, you
But
often
in Florida,
back in
we have a
here.
problem.
I never
People
pull
park right behind your building, you have blinker on, trying to park in your space.
That's not the middle of the street.
It's,
But no, I'm one of those people, you'll never see my car pulled in forward because it is 100% safer when you have full visibility, when you're leaving a
When
parking
you're
spot.
leaving. Yeah.
100%.
I'm
It's
backing
also
into
safer for women because we have a visual of the entire parking lot.
Or I'm not gonna go to J Street. How can you back into a parking? I'm sorry.
Parallel park, you have to
I'm
drive
tired, I'm getting
past and then
cranky.
you back in, do you not?
I'm driving down J Street. I want to park in front of LDRS subs. I'm gonna,
Back in.
there's no way to back in.
Yeah, you go forward and you back up.
but wait a minute, the angle of the parking would have to be switched completely. So when you
Right.
drive it, you would back into the angle of space, but the angle would face in the other direction. I'll-
got you.
I think I'm getting
Walk you
it.
through it.
yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Right
okay, so
now
you
you
go in
pull
front
in
of it and you
this
pull
way.
back in. All right, got it.
Pulling this way.
You have to charge. So we are changing the lines if we do that.
We would be
'cause
changing.
That's why I was having,
Right, but I was bringing it up just as an example, because in areas, if you have the space, because of course you're eating up into the street and you have the road diet, but if you, instead of parallel parking where, every 30 feet you might have space for 2 cars, you can, if you angle them in.
oh, it's
like-
easier
Just like
to park.
then you get more cars in.
Nobody's a fan of parallel.
And-
When people-
and I'm gonna be in favor of a program of valet parking for the mayors backing in. And it
Sounds good.
I'll bet if you change the line, I'll back in.
There you go.
Commissioners.
I do. I just wanted to talk about, again, theoretically, I love removing mandatory minimum parking, theoretically. I also know the community not ready for it,
Mhm.
not. So I'm not trying to go there yet. What I'm really trying to do is for us to first, I don't agree with this. We have to make things really painful for people first before we can improve our traffic situation. I really want us to show what's possible and
Show the
see
positive.
more people
Mhm.
deceased relying on cars.
Easily.
And once we get to a point where we're like, you know what, we have transportation, we have alternatives, we're seeing developments go up where people aren't spilling their cars all over the place. Then we can, start talking about it. But I think that's why the mobility plan and how can we make this a reality is so important.
Become a community of golf carts.
But do we have smaller spaces and we see more people? We have to talk about the golf carts. That's part of the mobility conversation. And now we have we get more people and the same amount of space.
Yep.
We need to talk about these things before we can really consider changing our parking requirements.
Now, we will be having a workshop on.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
No.
I'm sorry, that was just,
Parking / mobility.
Back
This
to
is
the
good,
beginning of
yeah.
the presentation, it's about sustainability and long-term value of the Lakewood Beach.
Mhm.
All,
and this is the only chance we get to talk about this stuff, so let's keep talking.
Mhm.
Yeah, what I realized years ago, I started looking at the paper would come and it was all photographs of new houses for sale. And what I realized was every house was really a garage door with the house kind of on the side. Now, and I thought we couldn't do that in Lake Worth anymore, but the guy across the street from me did that a couple, like 5 years ago, built a house that's not on the alley, but I guess there's anomalies. So we're not gonna take the cars away yet. And with, so we talk about people that, with car usage, they part of a life plan is, don't work and, and things are hard now because moving and stuff is so hard, but, try to get a job that's not 50 miles from your house. Another hard
Or don't date outside of your zip code. Well, I didn't do that one either. So.
I brought my man from San Francisco.
Ooh.
Miami, I did a little closer. Didn't have a lot.
You have a man? Does your wife know?
We're gonna talk about it.
We'll talk about that later.
It's a good thing we all get along. That's all.
Micro
Like the
units?
comment earlier, you just brings the
We're all just learning. We're all just, walking through this thing together.
And a question, is micro residential what most of us call tiny houses?
We haven't started that yet. Don't ask questions.
Nice
for me.
segue.
On the test.
Segue.
On the test.
Segue.
Segue.
Go ahead.
Segways are a great way to get around.
A micro unit is a type of tiny house, but not all tiny houses are micro units.
Okay.
Ooh, baby.
You never have a simple answer, do you? You're like,
I would never ask simple questions.
never have a.
Okay, so the next part of our workshop, thank you very much, Commissioner.
Is there a test at the end of this?
Yeah, the test is, it's, no, okay. Discussion of micro residential units, proposed amendments, discussion of proposed amendments to the city's land development regulations to allow the development and construction of micro residential units.
Yes, I'm in favor. Done, move on.
And I have, my question was, are we only talking about multifamily, or are we also talking about single?
At present, this is just doing multifamily
Multifamily.
in the mixed use districts because the micro unit proposal requires not only shared common area to help support the smaller unit, but also a shared outdoor area. And the building has to have mixed use
Mm.
and a minimum of 20 units.
Mhm.
And it does have a lower parking requirement, and the density, a micro unit only counts as 3/4 of a residential unit for density purposes versus a whole.
I'm all for them. I mean, people don't need that.
Can you define micro residential unit via square footage?
Yeah, they do. There's backup.
So it says 250 square feet to 750. That's like a cruise cabin, right? Like if you're going to cruise ship, it's like the cabin or a hotel room.
It has to have an operational kitchen, like a cooking service, refrigeration, and plumbing, a bathroom. But there are some really extraordinarily nice 250,
Oh, yeah.
300 square foot units. They are so popular, the one they finally got built in West Palm just sold for $84 million to be an extended stay hotel.
Yeah.
84 million?
Yes,
I have one
it's
that's
behind the
$1
community
million
foundation
too.
building.
Okay, we really
But
don't take
I can get the square. footage,
comments.
250 to.
750.
250 to 750. Yeah, it's in the backup, which may be,
It's online.
yeah, it's online too.
And it's a conditional use. It would become before a board to be approved, or it would come to you with, requiring density approval and it's a single bonus or plan development. There are performance standards for both the interior common space and the exterior. And just to give you an idea of the mixed use district where they would be allowed, as this is proposed, is the downtown district,
Mhm.
mixed use east, and transient oriented development east and west. We could open up if you want to include Dixie Highway, but I'm trying to encourage them where we already have some transit. So if you want to incorporate Dixie Highway as well, that will be fine. I'm not suggesting it on Federal Highway because there's no bus there.
Is there a minimum requirement for how many acres?
No. But there's a minimum requirement for the units. They have to be at least 20 units, so you have to have at least enough land
Land space,
area
yeah.
in the district to get to 20 units.
Do we know what that is off the top of your head?
Well, it depends on where it is. It
Size.
would be potentially 1/3 of an acre downtown. The TOD is about 1/4 of an acre, mixed use west. 3/4 of an acre. And that's, but you would need less, if you have a half an acre and you go plan development, you can get it done in a half an acre, which is basically about a half a block.
And for downtown areas, I think this is such a great idea because we're talking about servers, we're talking about single people, we're talking about couples, and this is the kind of more of a fluid concept for who's going to live there.
We've also improved that you get to know your neighbor because the units are smaller, so you spend more time in the common areas. And so you have a much more sense of communal, not a commune, but you have a sense of knowing your neighbors more than you would in a traditional condominium or apartment building.
But this is almost like when we had Lord's Place before us and they had that common space,
Yeah.
but they all
Similar
had,
concept,
this is the
but more
similar,
outdoor, I guess.
right,
This is private, they each have their own bathroom. It's-
right, but I'm saying it's
No,
a
yeah.
similar concept of having that communal area. So, because we were concerned about the square footage of those when we approved it.
But yeah, There was a concern.
Some of us were.
Some of us
Some
weren't.
of us were.
This take just a little bit more tweaking and it'll go into the hopper for you all to review hopefully in a couple months.
Commissioner Diaz.
Yeah, these are phenomenal. I already live pretty tiny, if you will, like under 400 square feet. So my question would be, I've always seen micro units and tiny homes as a good path to, first time home buyers, kind of like Sarah mentioned, because you can buy a manufactured, 200 square foot unit for 90,000. And they're really, they're really high-end materials because there's not a lot of it. You can pack in really high-grade construction and building, high-quality stuff, and because of your smaller footprint. But my question would be, like, would there be an issue? Some of these units are meant to be on wheels, or they come on wheels.
No, we're talking about, no, we're not talking about that. For this, that was my question at first, because I was wondering about a single one on the land. This is for a 20 unit or more.
Multiple
development.
units. Okay.
Yeah, I have the same question, because my house is about 800 and something, so I've lived for 33 years in a pretty tiny spot.
I would love to see us do a tiny home
Oh,
community
I'm
on a big piece of land like on Federal Highway and do 20
If
tiny homes.
economically it would
There's
make
a
sense.
potential that may come about, sort of. There is a plan development that has been batted around. Our comp plan does allow the minimum unit size can be 15% less than the requirement if it's affordable. And then through a plan development, you can relax certain standards. And so if this potential project moves forward, it would be not entirely a tiny home, but it'd be more like a collection of little villa homes
Mhm.
and a plan development.
Love that,
And the houses would be around 700 to 900.
Perfect.
which would fit perfectly in our city.
Yeah, I mean, that's where we're at.
Love that.
Good, glad to hear
That's exciting.
it. Keep our fingers
It's on the
crossed.
Drawing board.
Right.
Make sure you give them a permanent
I
mark.
want to check out the container home that was built on C
I've
Street.
got
Yeah, it's very
pictures
cool.
No, I've heard,
Several
Um,
times on it.
Yeah,
Well, in reference to what Mr. Diaz is, they have modular homes that can be stacked and like built into
Yeah.
configurations, as well as magazines focused on a lot, and it's quite economical. I don't know of one. I know that there was an entity trying to build one in Linwood. Some of the impact, the hurricane standards and building code standards are a little bit tough on connections and everything, but it does lead to an affordability issue that address a lot of our needs.
Yeah, and it's reusing materials. I mean, it's upcycling at its finest.
I have a question. This is completely, my house, I have a big side yard. It's a 50-foot lot, but everything's built on 25 feet. If I wanted to expand, I thought, why don't I just get like a tiny house and bring it in there and then connect it to my regular house? Would that be something on a foundation, not on wheels, but would that be something that could be
I have
just?
to look at it, but you could actually split off your other 25-foot lot and build a whole house on it.
I know, but my trees take up so much room.
I don't see why you couldn't. I'd have to look at that.
Yeah, it was just a thought, because I'm trying to think about it,
I'm
just a way
pretty
to
sure
get
you
a
could have 2
closet.
units, as long as you're in the MS30 district.
Oh, yeah. I mean, no, it would be connected. It would just say, I want to enlarge my bedroom. I want a closet. I want a second bathroom. I want to hang up my clothes in someplace other than the inside of my bedroom. I'm just gonna, I'll ask you about that. Any other comments?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of like getting to the whole micro neighborhood thing, because when you look at section D, I was a little bit confused, and maybe it just needs to be cleaned up a little bit, but it does say collection of multifamily structures.
Yeah, and individual micro units may not be combined to facilitate larger individual units.
Yeah, because I think we're in agreement that that's a great way to increase density without massive aggregation. I mean, it's going to happen. We should certainly work to allow it.
I think what this means is that you couldn't take 2 units and marry them together like the mayor wants to make one bigger one.
Yeah.
Not saying that what you're doing is wrong.
I get
I'm saying what here in the micro units, it would be wrong.
Right.
Yes, you couldn't combine and make it.
Correct.
Okay.
You could have multiple of them.
You could buy
but
2
not
and one lives on
marry-
one side,
but-
and
Exactly.
like me and my husband. Okay, any other
Exciting.
questions, comments? This has been so congenial.
I'm super excited about
I'm
that.
very
I have a
excited.
question. Well, so obviously this would not impact any of our neighbors that already live in single family districts. So I know sometimes people hear like one part of the conversation and get really nervous. So this wouldn't be going into neighborhoods, it would be downtown and the areas that are listed. And so you mentioned the 25-foot lots and where are we at that? Because currently you can replat them to their original.
They're already platted.
They're already platted.
If you have a parcel that has more than one platted lot of record, 25 feet, and the building that's there or if it's vacant, you can split it back into its originally platted lots of 25 feet, as long as if there's a building there, it doesn't create a non-conformity such as that building is too close to the property line of one of the lots. So we've had, oh my God, that's been a rush on those. We've probably done 30 of them in the past year.
To go from 50 to 25 and 25, yeah.
When you would think it would have been the opposite.
I love it.
I bought our
Great.
house because it is a double and
Right,
I would never
yeah.
want to give it up.
I think it's great too. I know that there was some concern before, which I was confused about because we have the cottages and it's part of who we are and what we celebrate and.
It was brought up as a concern of the preservation board because there was a parcel that had 4
Yeah.
25-foot lots. And it had been vacant for a while. I don't remember the context of
Yeah.
the building that was there, how many of the lots it was on. But because they were individual lots of record, it could have been split back into 4 parcels, each one lot of record, and they proposed 4 houses. Now, that was the other challenge is that we did not, and the preservation board did not support the same house being
Right.
renovated 4 times in a row. I think we got 2 different styles. It's okay. And it will be built soon.
Yeah.
It'll provide a nice living accommodation at a moderate price. And still think it's going to be in excess of what a lot of our residents can afford to buy. So it'll be more.
It's crazy.
And are we protected against, in our LDRs, our codes against another person trying to come in and build 4 identical houses in a row?
Only in a historic district. From straight code, the guidelines typically you can't replicate or create the same thing. In other parts of the city, we don't have that rule and we can't have that rule.
Hence the habitat houses all look the same.
But if we do the conservation district and the
That-
west side, we can incorporate that there.
Yes.
If we go historic on it. Is that if we go
Conservation.
historic,
Conservation was very interesting.
conservation?
It's like historic, but
It's preservation like.
so that you get the benefits of being historic, but you don't get all the like red tape overhead hassle.
You still have to meet certain criteria, but it's not going to be as onerous as we use that word as a full preservation district.
I have a feeling that the people who live in the historical.
Are gonna
districts
want
who do
it-
that
are gonna
going
wanna
to
go back.
come After us and be like, so now you're judging based on where we live, what we can afford, and I think that.
Well, let's take a look at it, see what happens. See
So
what-
yeah, we can reach out and hear from people.
Ma'am, we're not, I don't know who you are and we really don't take, yeah, no, we don't take public comment on yeah, sorry. I mean, unless there's one person here, if anybody wants to ask a question.
A short question?
Oh, you're coming from you.
And I just.
I'll ask that question.
Micro residential units, or can they be Airbnbs or?
That's a whole different,
Okay.
yeah, that's a
I
whole
won't
different
open
thing.
that can of worms.
That's a can of worms.
That's on the 23rd of May.
That's right.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. I'm back to visit you again and that one's not going to be as fun.
Bring your lunch. And what about ADUs? Are we doing a workshop on that as long as we're
We
killing
allow
it?
ADUs. The consternation appears that if, you want to allow them in the single family residential area, which covers about 35% of the city,
Right,
we have to change the zoning.
okay. And but couldn't you, I remember when this was a big kerfuffle a couple of years ago.
Awful.
If you wanted to, if I had a house in a single family district and I wanted to create a granny flat sort of thing, if it was connected to my house, I could do it, except it couldn't have a full kitchen. Is that correct? If I wanted to add on to my house, as long as the setbacks and the
It
square.
can be both connected to your house and in a separate accessory structure. If it's in the sex,
It can't,
it can't have a full kitchen.
but if it was a connected, could it?
No, you can only have one kitchen in a single. family
Right,
residence.
okay, so theoretically, if I had a house and I wanted Grammy, I mean, I bought my house because it had a little ADU for my grandmother. If I wanted to build one in a single family district and I had the room for setbacks and all that, and I wanted to build, a living room and a bedroom and a bathroom for Grammy, she just couldn't have a stove, essentially.
She couldn't cook your dinner.
She'd come to my kitchen to cook the dinner.
And it's, the FAR falls in place though too, right?
As
Okay.
long as you meet all the other regulations, you can do a guest quarters
Yeah,
as an accessory structure or as an addition to your house.
separate from your house, I guess, quarters,
There are limits on how big an accessory
Right.
structure can be based on the principle.
even the single family district. So what's all
We
the,
have separated garages all over the city, main house and a garage.
yeah,
That's an accessory structure. That accessory structure could be living space as long as it doesn't have a kitchen.
And what is the
So what was the
logic
big-
for no kitchen? Some people like to eat.
It becomes a dwelling unit then. A dwelling unit is a kitchen, a living space, and a bedroom and a bathroom.
okay, so let's say in my backyard, I have this, like a pool house, I mean, it's right, essentially. I could not get a rental license for it? Okay, so it's a guest
The
house.
license is if it's a dwelling unit, and the dwelling unit must have a full kitchen.
Okay, so I can have my cousin live there,
If your
a
cousin doesn't eat
distant
much.
cousin,
Not paying rent.
Who
right?
lives on ramen noodles? In a microwave.
That was my house in.
I don't know if
All right, all right, that's interesting, I didn't, okay, thank you.
Is the justification for that because a dwelling unit would need a separate meter and hook up and service?
No,
on it?
No.
single family residential allows one dwelling unit on a
Right.
parcel.
Okay,
But we have a lot of ADUs in,
Yes.
yeah,
In multifamily.
no, in single family zoning, we
We do have them,
They-
they're not conforming.
yeah,
Oh,
We have a zoning called single family 2-14 that would allow
Right.
them, but that would mean certain neighborhoods would have to be rezoned and possibly. What would freak people out is that we only have low density residential future land use, which is SFR subunits an acre. The next jump up is medium density residential, which is up to 20 units an acre, but you have to have that future land use designation before you can have single family 2-14. And I think before people went down that road, they would freak out. Yes, I know, it's a whole different conversation.
Is there a way to allow them in SF7?
No,
You have to rezone,
Legally, there's just not.
you have to rezone it.
Oh, wow, okay.
we have a lot of the area of the city that is single family 2-14, MF20,
Yeah.
MF30, that all of those allow an ADU or an accessory dwelling unit.
So did we rezone them?
And that's how.
No, that's just the way-
We rezoned the whole city in 2013.
But before that, when the dwelling units were built originally on
We didn't
this,
have zoning.
we didn't have any.
Way back when, we probably didn't have any.
Okay.
We had zoning in the 90s.
Well, most of these were built like in the 1920s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
40s,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and we had questionables then.
Eh, Listen, life was a lot easier. Yeah, I mean, listen, God bless my ADU.
I have one too.
It helped my grandmother and now it helps me.
I
pay the
think
rent.
there's enthusiasm on the dais here for, especially with the housing shortage, that's another way that you give people fairly affordable. It also generates a certain amount of income.
You'd be surprised at how much it costs to build them.
Mhm.
Especially right
My
now.
neighborhood has allowed them, and to my knowledge, there've only been 3 or 4 built in the 30 years I've owned my house.
Yeah,
Which is interesting. So that in terms of people being very concerned about it, empirically, your experience is they don't get built very often.
And if
They
do,
did
they're
at one
very
time, they were
high
quite common.
Paying people.
What you could do is go get one of those little half of a storage containers and put yourself an ADU with one of those.
Well, it's always fun. This is good. I mean, this is good conversations that we're having just to sort of get to know each other and figure out what we want. And,
Well, thank you very much for all the feedback. I've been anxiously waiting for this meeting for a long time.
So have we.
yeah.
It's been great. So
yeah,
thank
it's,
you.
it's a good
Thank you.
conversation.
Thanks, staff.
You'll be
Listen.
seeing some stuff coming
Yeah.
forward over the next couple of months.
A lot of
Hopefully
work.
Sunsetting that horrible program will be
The
the
utilities.
utilities
The utility
freebies.
Good job.
Oh, that, yeah,
Well, the consensus is, when do you have your next meeting?
Next week.
Yeah,
An item could be just be added under the city manager's report that right now, consensus is you just take a vote to sunset the program for time being, because I don't think it's created by an ordinance. I think it's created by a resolution.
Hmm.
I created, I can't remember how it is.
Although we do have a bit of an issue with add-ons to the agenda. I mean, it could
We
go,
have to go in May, right?
yeah, it could,
Yeah, let's
Wait till May.
rush it.
yeah, I don't want to set that precedent.
Elizabeth, could they do like a zoning in progress the next meeting, even though they don't have anything to vote on, that would put it in abeyance for the
True.
time being?
Do you have anybody that's looking for it within the next 2
Just
weeks?
one.
Oh, you
And
do?
I've talked them out of it. Well, I've talked them into that if you want to do it, you're gonna have to do some deed restricted housing for affordability.
But they haven't committed to it yet.
And they haven't submitted an application based on that. All right, well, it's almost 8 o'clock. I think we've done remarkably well.
Yeah.
Covered a lot, learned a lot, covered a lot of ground. Anybody have any closing comments, questions?
I
or
have a
concerns?
prepared 15 minutes.
I'm out.
I
See you later.
want to say, anybody from District 1?
3 or 4. Didn't you understand what the vice mayor title came with?
That's right, you have to show,
Extra minute.
you have to show, you have to be a good, set a good example for concise communications. Thank you. Do I have a
Contagious.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, really appreciate it. Do I have a motion?
Motion to cease and desist.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
By Commissioner Stokes, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Good job.
Yeah.
That one was-
I don't think it's called cease and desist.